Hello guys, welcome to Percy Jackson. So in this video, we will see, what if Percy read the Naruto bleassed with the power of sharingan? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Eye of the Storm. The fluorescent lights of Yancy Academy's cafeteria hummed with a lethargic drone, a sound that usually blended into the background static of a normal Tuesday lunch. But Percy Jackson wasn't normal, and the hum, to him, felt like a low, dull throb behind his left eye. It had been doing that more often lately, especially when his homeroom teacher, Mr. Nickel, droned on about American history, or when Nancy Bobofit, with her flaming red hair and a perpetual sneer, plotted her next culinary assault on Grover Underwood's half-eaten burrito. Percy watched Nancy now, not just with his eyes, but with a deeper, unsettling perception that had settled over him like a second skin over the past few months. He saw the subtle flex in her jaw, the way her eyes darted from Grover to the untouched ketchup packet on his tray. The barely perceptible shift in her weight as she leaned back, poised. Most kids would just see a bully looking for trouble. Percy saw the intent. He saw the sequence of actions that would inevitably lead to a ketchup-splattered Grover. He traced it in his mind. The grab, the squeeze, the trajectory. It was all there, laid out like a blueprint in the air around her. A shimmer of potential movements that only he seemed to perceive. It started about 6 months ago, after a particularly bad incident in the schoolyard. Some older kids had been picking on a smaller boy, and something in Percy had just snapped. He remembered a flash of crimson in his vision, a raw, protective fury, and then suddenly, he was moving with impossible speed, anticipating every punch, every kick. Deflecting blows that shouldn't have been deflectable. He'd barely touched the bullies, but they'd scattered, looking at him like he was a ghost. Later, alone in his room, staring at his reflection, his left eye had flared. A single, black, comma-shaped tomo spinning in a field of red. He'd known, with a chilling certainty, what it was. He'd read enough Naruto manga to recognize the cursed, magnificent power of the sharingan. Since then, it had been a constant struggle. The single tomo wasn't always active. It flickered on when he was stressed, angry, or in danger. And when it did, the world changed. Sounds sharpened, colors deepened, and time seemed to stretch, giving him an unbearable clarity. He saw the world in high definition, overloaded with information. He saw the faint tremor in Mr. Brunner's hand when he was deep in thought, the subtle twitch in Mrs. Dodd's eye when she was annoyed, the way the air currents shifted around a fly before it landed. It made him jumpy, irritable, and worse. It made him an outcast. The other kids found him unsettling, too intense, like he was always looking through them. They didn't understand why he sometimes paused mid-sentence, his gaze fixed on something invisible, or why he always seemed to know what they were about to say or do. Grover, oblivious to the subtle ballet of aggression unfolding beside him, munched happily on his apple. Percy reached out, snagging the ketchup packet from Nancy's fingers just as her thumb started to press down. "Having some trouble there, Nancy?" Percy asked, his voice calm, almost bored. His left eye, under the messy curtain of his hair, glowed faintly with a single, red tomo, then faded. The hum behind his eye quieted. Nancy froze, her hand still reaching, her sneer caught mid-formation. Her eyes narrowed. "What the hell, Jackson? Give that back." "Nah, I think Grover's had enough excitement for one day," Percy said, tossing the packet onto his own tray. He met her glare. She saw defiance. He saw a flash of frustrated rage, a micro-expression that told him she was already calculating her next move, a more direct one this time. She'd probably try to trip him on the way to class, or hide his textbooks. Standard Nancy fare. He already had 2 countermeasures in mind. A headache, dull and insistent, began to build behind his temples. This was the price. The constant vigilance, the processing of so much raw data, left him perpetually drained. He just wanted to be a normal kid, to worry about pop quizzes and getting detention, not about seeing the future trajectory of a condiment. "Jackson, Bobofit, is there a problem?" It was Mrs. Dodd's, their pre-algebra teacher, standing by the cafeteria entrance. Her voice was like grinding stones, and her eyes, usually narrowed into slits of annoyance, seemed to pierce through the noisy room, settling on Percy with an uncomfortable intensity. Percy felt a prickle of unease. Mrs. Dodds was off. Her movements were always too precise, too angular. Like a puppet on slightly rusted strings. She never quite blinked like a normal person, and sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, he'd seen her scan the room with an almost predatory gaze. A flicker of something ancient and hungry in her dark eyes. His nascent sharingan, even at one tomo, recognized the subtle wrongness, the way her shadow seemed to bend the light, the faint, acrid smell that clung to her, like ozone after a lightning strike. "No, Mrs. Dodds," Percy said smoothly, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Just a minor disagreement about a condiment. All resolved." Mrs. Dodds' lips thinned. "See that it stays resolved, Mr. Jackson. We wouldn't want any unpleasantness before our field trip." Her gaze lingered on him for a beat too long before she turned away. Her movements still unnaturally stiff. Grover let out a nervous bleat. "Dude, what was that?" "I don't know," Percy admitted, rubbing his forehead. "But I don't like it. And I really don't like Mrs. Dodds." The bus ride to the Metropolitan Museum of Art was an exercise in controlled chaos. Percy, trapped between Nancy Bobofit's perpetually jabbing elbow and the nauseating smell of stale potato chips, tried to focus on the passing cityscape. His eye, however, kept drifting to Mrs. Dodds, who sat rigidly in the front seat, occasionally turning her head to sweep her gaze over the students. Each time she did, Percy felt that familiar prickle, a faint, almost imperceptible distortion in the air around her, like a heat haze only he could see. He swore her silhouette sometimes seemed to ripple, blurring at the edges. "She's creepy," Grover whispered, leaning close. "Right, there's something not human about her." Percy merely grunted. He couldn't tell Grover the truth, not about the eye, not about the things he saw. He'd tried once, with his mom, about the schoolyard incident, and she'd just looked at him with that worried, sad expression that broke his heart. So he kept it to himself. A silent burden that weighed him down more each day. Nancy, never one to miss an opportunity, reached into her backpack. Percy's eyes immediately picked up the minuscule twitch in her shoulder, the slight clench of her fingers. He saw the crumpled sandwich wrapper, then the half-eaten peanut butter and jelly sandwich itself. He saw the exact arc it would take. He tensed. This wasn't about him. It was about Grover. Just as Nancy's arm began its upward swing, Percy intercepted it with a casual-looking block that seemed accidental. His hand brushed hers, causing her to fumble. The sandwich, instead of hitting Grover, sailed harmlessly over his head, landing with a wet splat on the seat in front. Nancy gasped, genuinely surprised this time. "Hey, Butterfingers, Bobofit," Percy smirked, a dangerous glint in his eye that made her pause. He could hear Mr. Brunner, their Latin teacher, humming a tune from the back of the bus, oblivious. Mr. Brunner, in his tweed jacket, always smelled faintly of peanut butter and parchment. He was the only teacher who ever seemed to understand Percy, even if he didn't understand what Percy was. He treated Percy not like a problem child, but like a deeply intelligent, if profoundly distracted, individual. The bus pulled up to the museum, a grand, imposing edifice that seemed to frown down at the boisterous teenagers spilling out onto the steps. Percy felt an odd mix of dread and anticipation. Ancient Greek mythology was usually a blur of names and dates for him, his ADHD making it impossible to focus. But lately, with his enhanced perception, the stories had begun to take on a new, unsettling depth. He saw the echoes of power, the raw savagery beneath the polished myths. It was as if the world he'd always dismissed as fiction was now asserting its gritty reality. Inside, the cool, echoing halls of the museum offered a temporary reprieve from the bus's stuffiness. Mr. Brunner, looking less like a Latin teacher and more like an excited scholar, led them through the Greek and Roman exhibits. He pointed out statues, explained intricate frescoes, and spun tales of gods and heroes with a passion that even Percy found infectious. "Here we have a depiction of the Furies, Mr. Brunner explained, gesturing to a relief carving of three-winged, hideous women. Also known as the Kindly Ones, though there was nothing kind about them. They were goddesses of vengeance, eternally pursuing those who spilled the blood of their kin. As Mr. Brunner spoke, the hum behind Percy's left eye intensified. A faint, crimson glow pulsed beneath his closed lid. He stared at the carving, and for a moment, the stone seemed to ripple. He didn't just see the carving, he felt the ancient malevolence emanating from it, a faint, lingering echo of the goddess's bloodlust. His stomach churned. He glanced around, his gaze drawn almost magnetically to Mrs. Dodds. She stood a little apart from the group, her face a mask of placid indifference, but her eyes, when they met Percy's, held a flash of something cold and knowing. The acrid, metallic smell he associated with her seemed stronger here, in the presence of these ancient images. He shivered. This place, these stories, they were alive. The incident with Nancy happened in front of a colossal statue of Zeus. She'd been pestering Grover all morning, flicking by TS of paper at his horns, which Percy was now certain were there, tucked under his curly hair. Grover, usually unflappable, was starting to get agitated. He shifted his weight, his hooves scraping softly against the polished marble floor. Percy saw the red blur of Nancy's hair as she launched herself forward, intending to shove Grover right into the statue's base. It was a stupid, pointless act, born of pure malice. Something cold and hard settled in Percy's gut. He knew what would happen. He saw Grover's stumble, the scrape of his knee, the inevitable tears. And then, he saw the faint, almost imperceptible golden thread, thinner than spider silk, that connected Grover's intended path to something much darker. His left eye pulsed, the single tomo spinning, trying to focus on this new anomaly. Without thinking, Percy stepped forward, intercepting Nancy mid-stride. He didn't push her, he simply shifted his body, leveraging her own momentum, turning her forward trajectory into a clumsy, uncontrolled spin. She tripped over her own feet, flailing wildly, and landed with a loud, undignified whump on the marble floor, a few feet from the statue, her face a blotchy red. The room went silent. "Oops," Percy said, his voice flat. He looked down at Nancy, who was now glaring up at him with a mix of shock and fury. "Butterfingers, Bobofit, again. Percy Jackson." Mrs. Dodds' voice cracked like a whip. Her eyes were blazing, and for a terrifying second, Percy saw her face ripple, her features elongating, sharpening, her teeth seeming to grow just a fraction too long. He took an involuntary step back. "Mr. Jackson, come with me," she snarled, her voice tight with suppressed rage. Now, he glanced at Mr. Brunner, who was watching him with a strange, thoughtful expression, his hand resting casually on his chariot wheelchair. There was a glint of something in the teacher's eye, a challenge, a silent question. Percy nodded, resigned. He knew what was coming. He'd done enough damage for one day. He followed Mrs. Dodds, the metallic scent clinging to her growing stronger, leading him away from the bustling group, deeper into the quieter, less trafficked halls of the museum. He tried to keep his sharingan suppressed, but the hum was a roar now, his left eye twitching under his eyelid. He knew, with an awful certainty, that this wasn't just about pushing Nancy. This was about him. They stopped in a deserted exhibit hall, filled with ancient Greek pottery and sarcophagi. The air here was heavy, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that pierced the high windows. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant murmur of voices from other parts of the museum. Mrs. Dodds turned, her face twisting. The transformation was not instantaneous, not a sudden flash of light and smoke. It was a gruesome, organic process. Her skin paled, tightening over her bones, her hair receded, revealing a leathery, scaled scalp. Her eyes, already unsettling, elongated, turning wholly black. Pupil-less orbs, filled with ancient hatred. Her fingers elongated, nails becoming wicked, bronze talons. From her back, leathery, bat-like wings unfurled with a rustle of ancient parchment. Her simple cardigan ripped and tore, revealing a form that was undeniably, horrifyingly, a fury. Electo. Percy stood frozen, his mind screaming in disbelief even as his senses, hyper-alert, confirmed the impossible. He'd seen creatures like this in manga, in fantastical stories. But this was real. The stench of sulfur and decay filled the air. "You think you can get away with it, Perseus Jackson?" she hissed, her voice now a guttural snarl, laced with venom. "You think you can hide what you are?" Percy stared, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt a surge of pure, unadulterated terror. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry. "We know who you are. We know what you've done," she snarled, taking a predatory step towards him, her talons scraping against the marble floor. "The master bolt is stolen. And you are the prime suspect." Percy shook his head, utterly bewildered. "What are you talking about? I don't know anything about a master bolt." "Lies," Alecto shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. She lunged, a blur of bronze and black. This was it, the moment of truth. The world seemed to explode. Time dilated, stretched thin and brittle. Percy's left eye, no longer able to be suppressed, burned crimson. Not one tomo, not even two. In the crucible of sheer terror and the primal instinct for survival, as Alecto's talons slashed through the air inches from his face. His vision exploded with detail. He saw the exact path of her claws, the shifting of her shoulder muscles, the minute air currents disturbed by her wings. And then, as if an invisible switch had been flipped, his right eye flared, joining the crimson glow. Two swirling tomo appeared in each eye, granting him an unprecedented level of perception. He saw it all. The attack wasn't a blur anymore. It was a sequence of distinct, comprehensible movements. He saw the weakness in her lunge, the slight overextension of her right wing. He ducked, twisting his body with an agility he didn't know he possessed, allowing her claws to shear through the air where his head had been milliseconds before. He landed in a crouch, his eyes scanning, processing. He wasn't just reacting, he was anticipating. Alecto shrieked in frustration, spinning and lunging again, faster this time, aiming for his chest. But Percy had already calculated her next move. He sprang to his feet, darting backward, weaving between the ancient pedestals, using them as temporary cover. He wasn't running. He was creating space, waiting for an opening, his mind racing through countless possibilities. He saw the flicker of annoyance in her eyes, the momentary loss of focus as she smashed a clay pot display in her fury. That was his chance. Suddenly, a cylindrical object, heavy and perfectly balanced, sailed through the air. Seemingly from nowhere, Percy's sharingan tracked it instantly. It was a pen, but it wasn't just any pen. It was bronze, capped, and somehow, he knew what it was. His hand shot out, snatching it from the air with impossible precision. As his fingers closed around it, the pen transformed, elongating and hardening into a gleaming, celestial bronze sword. Riptide. Alecto paused, her black eyes widening almost imperceptibly as she saw the blade. The scent of ozone intensified. Percy gripped the sword, the weight of it surprisingly familiar in his hand. He hadn't fought with a sword before. Not really, not in this life. But his sharingan was already at work, copying, adapting. He'd read enough Naruto to recognize the concept of copying fighting styles, and suddenly, his mind was flooded with 1,000 sword techniques, a blur of movement and parries and thrusts. It wasn't conscious thought, it was pure, intuitive knowledge, instantly available. He saw a brief, almost subliminal image of Mr. Brunner, still on his wheelchair, but now wielding a mighty gladius, his face grim. Alecto lunged again, more cautious now, but still underestimating him. Her claws raked the air, leaving shimmering trails of dark energy. Percy moved. It wasn't a clumsy, desperate scramble. It was a dance, precise and deadly. He parried her first strike, the celestial bronze ringing against her talons. He felt the shockwave reverberate through his arm, but his grip held firm. He spun, bringing the flat of his blade around to block a flanking swipe from her left hand, pushing her back. Creating another opening. He saw the pattern. Lunge, claw, wing buffet. She was fast, but predictable. His sharingan absorbed her movements, predicted her next 3 attacks before she even initiated them. He saw the subtle weakness in her defense, the brief window of vulnerability when she committed to a powerful strike. He waited. He dodged a vicious downward slash, dipping under her arm, the tip of his blade flashing. He didn't thrust. He moved with her, flowing, almost mirroring her movements, until he was directly inside her guard. Her next move was already coming, a wild, desperate swipe with her free hand, leaving her vulnerable for a fraction of a second. This was it. Percy shifted his weight, using his newfound agility. He spun, his body a blur. Riptide became an extension of his will. He didn't just stab, he struck with a precise, almost surgical elegance, aiming for the core of her essence, the center of the foul aura he'd been seeing since the beginning. The bronze blade plunged into her torso, not with a sickening crunch, but with a sound like tearing silk. Alecto shrieked, a sound of agony and pure, unholy fury. Her form shimmered, her dark eyes wide with shock and disbelief. She thrashed, her wings beating frantically, but the blow was fatal. Her body began to dissolve, crumbling into foul-smelling golden dust that swirled around Percy like a malevolent storm. Then, she was gone. Nothing remained but a faint, acrid smell and the golden motes settling silently on the marble floor. The pottery was shattered, pedestals overturned, a silent testament to the impossible battle that had just transpired. Percy stood, riptide still gleaming in his hand, chest heaving, his sharingan burning in his eyes. He looked down at the golden dust, then back at the now empty hall. He'd done it. He'd fought a monster, a literal monster from myth, and he'd won. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving him trembling, his muscles screaming in protest. His vision flickered, the hyper-clarity of his sharingan beginning to overwhelm him. The hum behind his eyes became a piercing shriek. He felt a searing pain, as if someone was trying to pry his eyeballs from their sockets. The world around him started to distort, wavering like a poorly tuned television screen. Percy, what happened? Mr. Brunner. He was rolling into the hall, his face etched with concern. Riptide's pen form now sitting innocently on his lap. But Percy barely registered it. The pain was too intense, too all-consuming. He tried to speak, but only a choked gasp escaped him. His knees buckled. He was falling, the world spinning. As his vision blurred, collapsing in on itself, he saw it. It wasn't the museum hall anymore. It was a vast, cosmic tapestry, woven from countless shimmering, golden threads. Each thread pulsed with a faint, inner light, twisting and interweaving, forming an intricate, terrifying pattern. And at the edges of this impossible vision, three ancient, veiled women sat. Their faces obscured by shadow, their hands working diligently at a colossal loom. They were the Fates. He saw them, clearer than he had ever seen anything. Their eyes, though hidden, felt like they were staring directly into his soul, cold and ancient. One held a distaff, spinning the thread of life. Another measured its length, and the third held a pair of impossibly sharp, shimmering shears. Poised over a particularly bright, vibrant thread. His thread. He felt a cold dread seize him, far worse than the fear of the Fury. He was not just fighting monsters. He was a pawn in a game he couldn't comprehend, a part of a design he was meant to follow. But the sharingan, even as it screamed in agony, showed him a flicker of defiance, a subtle distortion in the golden weave around his own thread. His choices, his actions, were making ripples in their perfect tapestry. And they did not like it. Their veiled faces seemed to turn towards him, a silent, cosmic disapproval. Then, blackness, the pain, the vision, the world itself, all extinguished in an instant. He woke up on the bus, his head pounding, the metallic taste of old blood in his mouth. The world looked normal. Mrs. Dodds was gone. Mrs. Kerr, a cheerful, plump woman Percy had never seen before, was handing out juice boxes. Grover was snoring softly beside him, his gaze fixed on a distant, fluffy cloud. "You okay, Percy?" Grover mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "You passed out, man. Gave us a scare." Percy blinked, trying to clear the haze from his mind. "Passed out? Yeah, in the museum," Grover said, sounding genuinely concerned. "Mrs. Kerr said you just keeled over. Said it was probably all that sun and running around." "Mrs. Kerr." He looked at the woman, her smile wide and innocent. She'd always been there, apparently. All his memories of Mrs. Dodds, the sinister glint in her eyes, the strange, angular movements, the metallic scent, they were gone, replaced by this pleasant, if entirely unfamiliar, woman. Everyone else on the bus, even Nancy Bobofit who was now giggling with her friends, seemed to have no memory of a Mrs. Dodds. He touched his left eye, then his right. No crimson glow, no tomo. Just the dull ache behind his temples. The vision of the Fates, the golden threads, it felt like a dream, a nightmare born of a feverish imagination. But the memory of the Fury, the feel of Riptide in his hand. The exact trajectory of her claws, that was too vivid, too real to be dismissed. The shattered pottery, the lingering faint scent of sulfur, they were etched into his mind. He was changed. He knew it with a chilling certainty. He wasn't just Percy Jackson, the troubled kid from Yancey Academy anymore. He was something more, something dangerous, something that saw beyond the veil. And whatever he was, it had drawn the attention of forces far beyond anything he could comprehend. The world, once mundane and frustrating, was now a tapestry of hidden dangers and impossible truths. And his part in it was just beginning. He just had to figure out how to survive. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Serpent's Gaze. The ancient Long Island Road was a ribbon of wet asphalt slicked with rain. A dark mirror reflecting the fury of the storm above. The beat-up Camaro swerved, its tires screaming in protest as another bolt of lightning tore the sky in two, illuminating a world gone mad. In the backseat, Percy Jackson wasn't screaming. He was watching, his mind a maelstrom of focused calm amidst the chaos. His left eye, a beacon of crimson in the dark, spun with two tomo. Absorbing the impossible reality unfolding around them. He saw the subtle shifts in his mother's grip on the steering wheel, the desperate terror etched in the lines around her eyes. He saw Grover, his goat legs now fully exposed, bleeding in panic, his knuckles white where he clutched the dashboard. And outside, keeping pace with the car with terrifying, earth-shaking strides, he saw the monster. The Minotaur. It wasn't just a big, hairy man with a bull's head. Percy's sharingan stripped away the myth, showing him the raw, brutal truth. He saw the thick, corded muscles bunching in its shoulders before it charged. The faint tremor in the ground that preceded each hoof fall, the wild, unthinking rage that burned in its beady, black eyes. It was a creature of pure, instinctual violence. And woven around it, shimmering in the rain-soaked air, was a single, thick golden thread, a tether of fate that seemed to be pulling it, inexorably, towards them. Towards him. Almost there. His mother shouted over the roar of the engine and the thunder. Just over that hill, the pine tree. Percy saw it too. A lone, massive pine, standing sentinel on the crest of a hill. It radiated a faint, golden energy. A warmth that pushed back against the storm's oppressive cold. It was a barrier, a sanctuary. But the Minotaur was closing in. Another lightning strike, closer this time, and the world went white. The car hydroplaned, spinning wildly before slamming into a ditch with a sickening crunch of metal and glass. The engine died with a final, choked gasp. Silence, for a moment, save for the drumming of the rain. Then, a roar of triumph from the darkness. Out, now, Sally Jackson screamed, unbuckling her seatbelt. Percy, Grover, run. Get to the tree. They scrambled out of the ruined car. The rain plastering their clothes to their skin in seconds. Grover, nimble on his hooves, was already halfway up the hill. Percy's mother pushed him forward. Go, Percy, don't wait for me. He hesitated, his eyes locked on the colossal, horned silhouette lumbering towards them. He saw the trajectory of its next charge, the raw, unstoppable force it represented. His mother wouldn't make it. The golden thread binding the monster to him was taut, humming with deadly intent. It didn't care about her. It only wanted him. He's after me, Percy said, his voice eerily steady. He won't stop. Then don't let him catch you. Go, she yelled, her face pale with a fear that was entirely for him. He saw the Minotaur lower its head, its massive horns aimed directly at his mother. Time stretched. The two tomo in his eyes spun faster, drinking in the scene. He saw the charge before it began. He saw his mother's desperate, futile attempt to dodge. He saw the inevitable, bloody conclusion. He wouldn't let it happen. Mom, get down, he screamed, and shoved her with all his might. She stumbled, falling into the wet grass just as the beast thundered past. But it was too fast. Its massive, meaty hand, bigger than Percy's head, shot out and closed around her. She cried out, a sharp, terrified sound that was swallowed by the storm. Her body dissolved into a shower of shimmering golden light, a captive of the underworld. The world went silent for Percy. The rain, the thunder, Grover's panicked bleats from the top of the hill, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. All that remained was the monster, its prize secured, turning its soulless eyes back to him. And the rage, a cold, pure, crystalline rage that burned away his fear, his grief, everything. His sharingan exploded with power. The third tomo in each eye blazed into existence, completing the pattern. The world snapped into a new, terrifying level of focus. He saw everything. The individual droplets of rain hanging in the air. The faint electrical charge building on the tips of the Minotaur's horns. The subtle imbalance in its stance from its lunge. The beast snorted, pawing the ground, and charged. Percy didn't run. He stood his ground, riptide. Still in pen form, clutched in his hand. He watched the monster come, a mountain of muscle and fury bearing down on him. His mind, supercharged by the fully matured sharingan, processed the attack with impossible speed. He saw the feint to the left, the lowering of the right horn, the precise angle of its intended impalement. He moved. Just as the horn was about to pierce his chest, he sidestepped, a fluid, economical motion that seemed to defy physics. He flowed around the beast's charge, using its own momentum against it. He uncapped Riptide, the celestial bronze blade springing to life. A faint golden gleam in the storm. He didn't try to stab the thick hide. He aimed for the weak points his eyes now saw with perfect clarity, the joint where the massive arm met the shoulder. He spun, his blade a blur, and slashed upwards. The sword bit deep, severing muscle and tendon. The Minotaur roared in pain and fury, a sound that shook the very ground. It spun, trying to crush him. But Percy was already gone, darting back, creating distance. The monster was wounded, enraged, and now, more predictable. It charged again, blindly this time, all rage and no thought. Percy saw his opening. He waited until the last possible second, then leapt, not away, but up. He planted a foot on the creature's charging knee, using its own forward motion to propel himself onto its back. He scrambled up its massive shoulders, gripping its matted, wet fur, the stench of blood and wet animal filling his nostrils. The Minotaur thrashed wildly, trying to dislodge him, but Percy held on. His eyes locked on his target. He saw the vulnerable spot at the base of the monster's skull, where the spine met the thick, bony plate. He raised Riptide high, the bronze blade catching the flash of lightning, and plunged it downwards with all his strength. There was a sickening crunch, a final, gurgling roar, and the colossal body shuddered, then collapsed. It dissolved into a mountain of golden dust that was instantly scattered by the wind and the rain. Percy landed lightly on the muddy ground, his chest heaving. One of the monster's horns had broken off in the fall, a jagged, ivory-colored trophy lying in the grass. He picked it up, its weight a solid, grim reminder of what had just happened. He looked up the hill, at the pine tree, then back at the spot where his mother had vanished. The rage had subsided, leaving behind a hollow, aching emptiness. He had won, but he had lost everything. He stumbled up the hill, the Minotaur's horn in his hand, and collapsed at the base of the great pine. The golden energy of the camp's border washing over him as darkness finally claimed him. He woke to the smell of lemon polish and the soft warmth of sunlight on his face. He was in a comfortable bed, in a rustic, airy room that looked like an attic loft. A pretty, blonde-haired girl with startlingly intense gray eyes was spooning something that looked like pudding into his mouth. "You drool when you sleep," she said, her voice a mix of clinical observation and mild amusement. Percy sat up, his head clearing. The events on the hill came rushing back, a brutal, vivid montage. His mother, the Minotaur, the three-tomo sharingan. He instinctively closed his eyes, willing the crimson to fade, the intense perception to recede. The dull ache behind his temples was a familiar companion. He looked around the room, his eyes taking in everything. Not just the mounted monster heads on the wall or the various weapons leaning in corners. He saw the faint shimmer of residual magic clinging to a shield, the subtle wear and tear on a bow that suggested years of use, the way the sunlight from the window wasn't quite natural, holding a golden, perpetual late afternoon hue. The girl, Annabeth, introduced herself, as did the man in the wheelchair who rolled in, who he now knew was the centaur Chiron, not Mr. Brunner. They spoke of gods, of demigods, of camp half-blood. Percy listened, his face a mask of quiet contemplation. He wasn't bewildered. He wasn't shocked. After fighting a fury and the Minotaur, gods and monsters seemed like the next logical, if insane, step. What unsettled him was what he saw. Chiron's smile didn't always reach his eyes. There was a deep, ancient weariness there, a caution that bordered on suspicion. Annabeth's gaze was like a physical weight, constantly assessing him, analyzing him, trying to solve the puzzle he presented. And Mr. Dionysus, the god of wine, lounged at a card table, radiating an aura of bored, petulant power that made the air around him feel thick and heavy. His sharingan, even when dormant, warned him that this slovenly, irritable man could unmake him with a thought. "So you're telling me," Percy said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through Chiron's gentle explanation, "that my father is one of the Greek gods. And that's why monsters have been trying to kill me." Chiron nodded slowly. "In essence, yes, and you don't know which one. Your father has not yet claimed you," Chiron said gently. "But he will, in time." Percy's eyes narrowed slightly. He saw the subtle evasion in Chiron's posture, the flicker of something unsaid. They were holding back. There was more to this story, more to the stolen item Grover had nervously mentioned before being shushed. He didn't push. Not yet. Information was a weapon, and he wouldn't reveal his own hand until he had a clearer picture of the board. For now, he would watch, and he would learn. His tour of the camp with Annabeth was less of an introduction and more of an interrogation disguised as a walk. She pointed out the lava-climbing wall, the sword-fighting arena, the Pegasus stables, all the while peppering him with questions, her gray eyes sharp and probing. "So you've never had any training? At all?" she asked, watching him as he observed two demigods sparring in the arena. "No," Percy replied truthfully. His eyes, however, were doing more than watching. With a flicker of his sharingan, he was absorbing their movements. He saw the Ares campers' aggressive, powerful lunges, the Apollo campers' nimble footwork and defensive parries. He saw the subtle shift of weight, the telegraphing of a strike, the momentary openings in their guards. He cataloged it, stored it. A library of combat data, growing with every observation. "That's impossible," Annabeth stated, crossing her arms. "The way you took down the Minotaur, Grover said you moved like you'd been fighting your whole life." "I got lucky," Percy said, his gaze still fixed on the sparring match. He copied a complex disarming maneuver in his mind, breaking it down into a dozen smaller, more manageable steps. Annabeth's frustration was palpable. Nobody gets that lucky. Her frustration boiled over a few hours later, at the bathrooms. Percy had been claimed by the Hermes cabin, a catch-all for the unclaimed, and Clarisse Leroux, the burly, intimidating daughter of Ares, had decided he needed a proper welcome. She and three of her equally large siblings cornered him, their intentions clear. Annabeth and a few other campers stood back, watching. A silent test to see what the new kid was really made of. "Gonna give you a swirly, newbie," Clarisse sneered, cracking her knuckles. "Welcome to Camp Half-Blood." They charged. Percy sighed. He was tired, grieving, and profoundly annoyed. He hadn't wanted this. He hadn't wanted any of it. His sharingan flared to life, three tomo spinning in each eye. The world slowed to a crawl. He saw the clumsy, telegraphed punch from the demigod on his right. He saw Clarisse's grab for his shirt. He saw the other two moving to box him in. It was sloppy, all brute force, no finesse. He moved. He ducked under the first punch, his hand shooting out not to strike, but to cup the boy's elbow. He pivoted, using the boy's own momentum to spin him around and send him stumbling into his brother. As Clarisse's hand reached for him, he slapped it away, his other hand striking the pressure point at her wrist, a move he'd seen in a manga and instinctively knew how to replicate. Her hand went numb, her eyes widening in shock. He flowed between them, a ghost in their midst. He never threw a punch. It was all deflections, joint locks, and throws. A leg sweep sent one Ares camper crashing to the floor. A precisely applied shoulder lock neutralized another. He was using their own size and aggression against them, turning them into a tangled, groaning pile of limbs on the grimy bathroom floor. The whole confrontation lasted less than 5 seconds. He stood over them, his crimson eyes glowing in the dim light. Clarisse, clutching her numb wrist, stared up at him, her usual arrogance replaced by a mixture of disbelief and genuine fear. Then, he looked at the toilets. With a flick of his will, every pipe in the bathroom shuddered. The water in the toilets erupted, geysers of brackish water shooting upwards, drenching Clarice and her siblings in a thoroughly humiliating shower. The other campers, Annabeth included, just stared, their jaws hanging open. They hadn't just seen a son of the sea god command water. They had witnessed a display of martial skill that was completely alien. It wasn't Greek wrestling or sword fighting. It was something else entirely. Something faster, more precise, and terrifyingly efficient. Percy's sharingan faded, the strain making his head throb. He turned and walked out of the bathroom, leaving the sputtering, soaked Ares campers and a stunned audience behind him. He had made his point. He was not to be trifled with. His reputation preceded him in to capture the flag. He was no longer just the new kid, he was the quiet, intense demigod who had dismantled 4 Ares campers without breaking a sweat. When the teams were divided, he was placed on Annabeth's blue team, a fact that clearly pleased and unnerved her in equal measure. She was the captain, and she had a plan. "Percy, you're on border patrol," she commanded, handing him a helmet that he accepted but didn't put on. It would obscure his vision. "You, Luke, and a couple others. Just hold the line at the creek. The main assault will be on the right flank." Percy nodded, but he saw the lie. His sharingan picked up the subtle tells, the way her eyes darted towards the left flank, the slight tension in her jaw. The main assault wasn't on the right. She was using him as a decoy, expecting Ares and their allies to throw everything they had at the kid who'd humiliated their leader. It was a sound strategy. But she was underestimating him. He took his position by the creek, Luke Castellan giving him a friendly, reassuring smile. Percy returned it, but his eyes saw something else. He saw a flicker of resentment deep in Luke's gaze, a bitter, hidden anger that was completely at odds with his easygoing demeanor. Another puzzle piece, another warning. The conch horn blew, and the game began. For several minutes, all was quiet. Then, the forest erupted. A full squadron of Ares campers, led by a still fuming Clarice, burst from the woods, just as Annabeth had predicted. They charged straight for Percy. Luke and the others braced for impact, drawing their swords. "Hold them here," Luke yelled. "No," Percy said calmly. "Let them come." He stood his ground, his sharingan blazing. He saw their charge not as a chaotic mob, but as a series of attack vectors. He saw the gaps in their formation, the predictable arcs of their swords. When they were almost upon him, he moved. He became a whirlwind of bronze and motion. He disarmed the first camper with the same technique he'd copied in the arena. He used the flat of his blade to trip another, sending him careening into his friends. He parried Clarice's spear thrust with such force that it was nearly wrenched from her grasp. He wasn't fighting them, he was dismantling them, his movements so fast and precise that they couldn't land a single blow. But this was only half the battle. While he held their attention, his eyes were scanning the wider forest. His enhanced vision pierced through the twilight gloom. He saw it, a flicker of blue. Annabeth's team, using the distraction he was providing, was sweeping around the left flank, completely unopposed. He saw something else, too. Annabeth herself, her blonde hair a beacon. Breaking from the main group, her invisibility cap in hand. She was circling back, heading for the red team's flag, which was now barely defended. A brilliant, multi-layered strategy. He had to admit, he was impressed. He finished with the Ares campers by summoning a wave from the creek that washed them back into the woods, sputtering and disoriented. "Luke," he said, turning to the stunned son of Hermes. "Take the others and support the left flank. I'll handle defense." Before Luke could argue, Percy was gone, melting into the woods. He moved with a silent, preternatural grace, his sharingan guiding him through the trees. He wasn't heading for the enemy flag. He was heading for Annabeth. He found her just as she was about to grab the red flag. She materialized out of thin air, a triumphant smirk on her face. A smirk that vanished when she saw him standing there, leaning against a tree, his arms crossed. "Percy, what are you?" "Good plan," he said, his voice calm. "Using me as the bait while your main force circled around." "Very Athena." Her gray eyes narrowed, a storm of confusion and calculation brewing within them. "How did you?" "I see things," he said simply. "You should have known your strategy had a flaw. You left your own flag completely undefended." Her eyes widened in realization. As if on cue, a triumphant shout came from their own side of the creek. Luke, having followed Percy's direction, had looped around with his group and captured the blue team's flag. Annabeth stared at him, her brilliant mind working furiously, trying to understand how he had unraveled her entire plan. It wasn't just that he'd seen through it, he'd predicted it, countered it, and turned it against her, all while single-handedly holding off 5 Ares campers. "Who are you?" she whispered, a hint of awe in her voice. Before he could answer, a guttural snarl ripped through the forest. A massive, shadowy beast, larger than any dog he had ever seen, burst from the trees. Its eyes glowed like hot coals, and saliva dripped from its bared fangs. A hellhound. It wasn't part of the game. It was a creature of the underworld, and it had been drawn by the scent of a powerful demigod. It ignored Annabeth. It lunged straight for Percy. There was no panic, no fear, just cold, absolute focus. His 3 Tomo sharingan locked onto the beast. He saw the pounce, the snap of its jaws, the trajectory of its claws. He met its charge head-on. He ducked under its snapping jaws, his body a blur. Riptide flashed in the twilight, a single, clean, upward arc. The celestial bronze blade sliced through the monster's underbelly with brutal efficiency. The hellhound let out a choked whimper, its massive body dissolving into shadow and dust before it even hit the ground. Percy stood over the fading remains of the monster, the water from the creek swirling around his ankles as if paying homage. He was breathing steadily, his crimson eyes scanning the woods for any other threats. Silence. The entire camp, drawn by the commotion, had gathered on the banks of the creek. They stared, utterly silent, at the spot where the hellhound had been, and then at Percy. Then, a light began to glow above his head, a soft, sea-green luminescence that cast his face in an eerie glow. It solidified, forming a holographic image, a shimmering, 3-pronged trident. A whisper went through the crowd. "Poseidon, son of the Earthshaker, one of the big 3. But Percy barely heard them. He was looking at Annabeth, whose face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The daughter of Athena, the master strategist, had just met an unsolvable problem. A boy who could see through any strategy, who could defeat any foe, who was claimed by one of the most powerful gods in existence. He was Percy Jackson, son of Poseidon, but standing there, with the water at his feet, a monster's dust at his side, and the cursed, all-seeing eyes of the Uchiha burning in his sockets, he knew he was something more. Something new, and something a whole lot more dangerous. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Threads of Prophecy. The world, for Percy Jackson, was now divided into 2 distinct realities. There was the one everyone else saw, the sun-drenched strawberry fields of Camp Half-Blood, the cheerful chaos of the dining pavilion, the earnest, sweaty faces of demigods training in the arena. Then, there was the world he saw, a place overlaid with the shimmering, gossamer thin threads of fate, a world where ores of power bled from gods and monsters like heat from asphalt, a world where a friendly smile could hide the coldest, most calculated betrayal. Being the son of Poseidon didn't earn him friends, it earned him space. Campers would part for him as he walked by, whispers following him like his own shadow. They spoke of the hellhound, of the way he had dismantled Clarice and her siblings, of the trident that had burned in the air above his head. They saw power. He saw fear and envy. Twin emotions that pulsed in the air as ugly, discordant colors his sharingan couldn't unsee. Chiron's face, when he summoned Percy to the big house, was etched with a gravity that seemed to add 1,000 years to his already ancient features. Dionysus, who was forced to be present, simply looked bored, swirling a can of Diet Coke with a flick of his wrist that hinted at the divine power he was forbidden to use. The air around him was a murky purple, thick with resentment. "Percy," Chiron began, his voice low. "We need to talk about the summer solstice." He laid it all out. Zeus's master bolt, the most powerful weapon in the Olympian arsenal, had been stolen. Zeus, in his infinite paranoia, had immediately blamed his brother, Poseidon. The claiming of Percy, a forbidden child, was seen not as a coincidence, but as the final, public insult. An admission of guilt. "He thinks my father used me to steal it?" Percy asked, his voice flat. He felt no shock, only a weary sense of resignation. Of course it was him. The golden thread of fate he'd seen tied to the Minotaur now felt like a chain, yanking him towards a destiny he had no interest in. Zeus's pride is easily wounded, Chiron said carefully. He has demanded the bolt's return by the summer solstice. That is 10 days from now. If it is not returned, there will be war. A war that will make the Trojan War look like a schoolyard skirmish. And let me guess, Dionysus drawled, not even looking up from his card game of solitaire. Daddy Zeus thinks Perry Johnson here has the missing toy. Percy Jackson. Percy corrected automatically, his eyes narrowing. He watched the god's hands. Dionysus's movements were casual, but Percy's sharingan saw the infinitesimal, precise control, the utter lack of wasted motion. This god wasn't just lazy, he was lethally efficient, even in his boredom. Whatever, Dionysus waved a dismissive hand. The hellhound, Chiron continued, ignoring him, was summoned from the fields of punishment. Only a being with access to the underworld could have done it. Someone inside this camp summoned it. A chill went down Percy's spine. He saw it then, a brief, horrifying flash of memory. Luke, standing near the edge of the woods during Capture the Flag, his smile easy, but his eyes had been scanning the shadows, not for opponents but for something else. Waiting. Hades, Percy said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. It was the logical conclusion. The perfect frame-up. The Lord of the Dead hated his brothers. A war between them would only strengthen his own position. Chiron nodded grimly. Hades has grown bitter over the centuries. He holds a grudge against all the children of his brothers. We believe he stole the bolt using a demigod hero, and is now hiding it in his realm, waiting for the war to begin. The pieces clicked into place, a neat, tidy puzzle designed to deceive. But Percy had seen a piece that didn't fit, a vision that poisoned the entire picture. He said nothing. A quest is required, Chiron announced, his eyes meeting Percy's. Someone must travel to the underworld, confront Hades, and retrieve the master bolt before the solstice. Percy felt the invisible chains tighten. There was no choice. There never had been. You want me to do it? It wasn't a question. The attic of the big house was a repository of forgotten memories and forsaken destinies. Dust motes thick as insects danced in the single shaft of moonlight that pierced the grime on the window. Piles of heroic junk, shields dented by claws, monster horns, and faded camp T-shirts, lay scattered like tombstones. At the center of it all, sitting on a three-legged stool, was a mummy. The Oracle of Delphi. Its desiccated form was unsettling. But Percy's sharingan saw something far more disturbing. Countless golden threads, the very fabric of prophecy, were woven into and around the corpse, connecting it to the past, the present, and 1,000 possible futures. The air was thick with the energy of destinies foretold and fulfilled. As Percy approached, a green mist, thick and foul-smelling, seeped from the mummy's mouth. It swirled around him, and the mummy's head lifted, its jaw cracking open. A voice, ancient and raspy, yet impossibly loud, echoed not in the room, but directly inside his skull. You shall go west, and face the god who has turned. The words hit him like a physical blow, but it was his vision that shattered. The attic dissolved. He was standing in a vast, dark cavern, before a throne carved from obsidian and bone. A colossal, shadowy figure sat upon it, radiating an aura of such profound despair and ancient power that Percy felt his own soul cry out. It was Hades, but his face was a mask of cold, calculating rage. He was not the thief. Percy knew with sudden clarity, he was a king who had been wronged. The vision fractured, and the oracle's voice boomed again. You shall find what was stolen, and see it safely returned. Another flash. He saw a 2-foot-long cylinder of celestial bronze, crackling with an almost unimaginable amount of raw, white-hot energy. It was in a simple backpack, humming with contained power. He saw it being handed over, not to Zeus, but to someone else, a shadowy hand reaching to take it. You shall be betrayed by one who calls you a friend. This time, the vision was not a flash. It was a crystal clear, slow-motion nightmare. He was standing by the creek at camp. Luke Castellan was walking towards him, his familiar, friendly smile firmly in place. You're a true hero, Percy, Luke was saying, his voice warm with camaraderie. But as he drew closer, the smile twisted, curdling into a sneer of pure, undiluted hatred. In his hand was a new sword, one Percy had never seen, its blade a wicked two-toned mix of steel and celestial bronze. And from its tip, a single drop of green poison fell. The sheer, visceral reality of it made Percy gasp, stumbling back against a pile of old shields. This wasn't a possibility. This wasn't a warning. His sharingan was showing him a memory of the future, a moment in time as real and as fixed as the past. Before he could recover, the final, crushing line came. And you shall fail to save what matters most, in the end. The vision that followed was the worst of all. He was back on the storm-swept hill, but this time he saw it from a distance. He saw himself fighting the Minotaur, a blur of desperate motion. And he saw his mother, Sally Jackson, not being captured, but dissolving into a brilliant, final shower of golden light. It wasn't a capture. It was a death. He had failed. She was gone. Not just taken. Gone forever. The green mist receded, snapping back into the mummy's mouth with a faint hiss. The attic was just an attic again. Percy stood trembling, not from fear, but from the cold, heavy weight of absolute certainty. The quest was a lie. The mission was a trap. And his victory would be his greatest failure. He was walking into a story that had already been written, and the ending was tragedy. He descended the stairs, his face a pale, unreadable mask. Chiron was waiting at the bottom, his expression anxious. "Well?" the centaur asked. Percy's voice was hollow. "I have my quest." He met Chiron's eyes, and for a moment, the old centaur seemed to flinch from the cold, hard clarity he saw there. The boy who had gone up the stairs was gone. The one who came down was a veteran of a war he hadn't yet fought. He had to choose two companions. The choice was obvious, and agonizing. He found Grover by the canoe lake, nervously chewing on a tin can. The satyr's empathy meant he could already sense Percy's distress, his hooves shuffling anxiously in the mud. "I'm going on a quest, Grover," Percy said, getting straight to the point. "I want you to come with me." Grover dropped his can with a clatter. You do. But I'm the worst. I'm a failure. I failed with Talia and I don't care about that," Percy cut him off, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I trust you. Your connection to the wild. We'll need it. And I need someone on this quest who isn't a demigod, someone whose loyalty isn't a question mark." He thought, the image of Luke's sneer burning in his mind. Grover just stared, his eyes wide, before nodding, a slow, dawning look of determination on his face. "For you, Percy, I'll go." Finding Annabeth was harder. She wasn't at the armory, or the Athena cabin, or the arena. He finally located her on the beach, staring out at the gray, churning waters of the Long Island Sound. She was tracing complex diagrams in the sand with a stick. Battle formations. She looked up as he approached, her stormy gray eyes already analyzing him. "You got the quest." "I did," he confirmed, stopping a few feet away. "You'll need a strategist," she said. It wasn't a plea, it was a statement of fact. Someone who knows the myths, who understands the politics of the gods. "You need me." Percy watched her, his sharingan picking up the fierce ambition that burned in her aura like a silver flame. She'd been waiting for a quest her whole life. But he also saw the genuine, razor-sharp intellect behind her pride. He needed that. He needed a mind that could see the board in ways he couldn't, even if he could see the individual moves of the pieces. "My prophecy said I would be betrayed by a friend," he said. His voice cold. It was a test. Annabeth didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her own unwavering. "Then I guess you'll have to watch your back. And I'll watch mine." It was the perfect answer. She acknowledged the danger without platitudes or false promises. She was a pragmatist, a survivor. "All right, Chase," he said with a curt nod. "You're in. Pack your bags. We leave at dawn." He walked away, leaving her on the beach. He knew he was taking a risk. After his vision of Luke, trusting any demigod felt like holding a scorpion. But Annabeth Chase was a risk he had to take. She was a weapon, and he would be a fool to leave a weapon like that behind. The Greyhound bus smelled of stale air and quiet desperation. Percy sat by the window, the world outside a blur of green and gray. Annabeth was beside him, her brow furrowed as she studied a map of the United States. Grover sat across the aisle, trying to disguise his nervous bleeding as a particularly bad case of the hiccups. Percy wasn't looking out the window. His focus was on the three old ladies who had boarded at the last stop, sitting together in the back. They were knitting, their needles clicking in a frantic, unnatural rhythm. To everyone else, they were just grandmothers in floral print dresses. To Percy's sharingan, they were hideous. Their forms wavered and distorted, their faces aka, chenille flashing with leathery skin and bronze fangs. The acrid, metallic scent of a fury clung to them like cheap perfume. Alecto was back, and she'd brought her sisters. He'd felt them coming for miles. A discordant hum in the tapestry of fate. He had warned Annabeth and Grover, his voice a low whisper. Trouble. Back of the bus. Don't look. Annabeth's hand had instinctively gone to the hilt of her new bronze knife. Grover had started chewing nervously on the bus seat's upholstery. The bus rumbled through the Lincoln Tunnel, plunging them into artificial, orange-tinged darkness. This was it. Now, Percy said, his voice cutting through the drone of the engine. As one, the three old ladies transformed. The bus was filled with the shriek of tearing fabric and the leathery snap of wings. Alecto, Megara, and Tisiphone unfolded to their full, monstrous glory, their eyes burning like coals in the dim light. Passengers screamed, diving for cover. Chaos erupted, but Percy was a point of absolute calm in the storm. Annabeth, left. Tisiphone attacks high. Grover, get the mortals down. Now, he commanded. His sharingan was a blur of motion, tracking all three furies at once. He saw their attack patterns. The synchronized swoops and dives they'd perfected over millennia. Annabeth, trusting his impossible foresight, didn't hesitate. She drew her knife and met Tisiphone's diving charge, her blade a blur of bronze. Grover, overcoming his panic, began ushering screaming passengers to the front of the bus, away from the fight. Percy engaged Alecto and Megara. He moved Thrug, the cramped aisle of the bus not like a boy, but like a force of nature. He used the seats as springboards, launching himself into the air, twisting his body to avoid their raking claws. He copied Alecto's own corkscrew dive, a move he'd seen her use in the museum, and slammed the pommel of Riptide into her temple, sending her crashing into the bus's ceiling. Megara lunged, her whip-like tail cracking. Percy saw the attack coming. He dropped flat, the whip hissing through the air where his head had been. He slid across the floor, his sword flashing out, scoring a deep gash on her leg. The bus driver, panicking, slammed on the brakes. The vehicle skidded, tires screaming, and crashed through a guardrail, lurching to a stop on the shoulder of a busy New Jersey highway, its back end hanging precariously over the edge. Through the shattered back window, in the brief, flickering strobe of passing headlights, Percy saw them. The three fates stood on the side of the highway, an island of ancient stillness amidst the chaos. The world around them seemed to slow, the golden threads of destiny becoming visible, stark against the night. Atropos, the final sister, raised her shears. She was poised to snip the life thread of a truck driver, a man whose rig was now careening towards their disabled bus. A random, meaningless death, a casualty of their war. A guttural, no, escaped Percy's lips. It was a primal, instinctual rejection of their cold, cosmic arithmetic. He didn't have a plan. He just acted. He focused his will, drawing on the water in the bus's small lavatory tank. With a grunt of effort, he sent a pressurized jet of water shooting out of the broken window. It wasn't enough to stop the truck, but it was enough to spray across its windshield, momentarily blinding the driver. The driver swore, wrenching his wheel to the side. The massive 18-wheeler swerved, its horn blaring, and scraped past the bus with a deafening screech of metal on metal, missing them by inches. The life thread in Atropos's shears did not break. Percy felt it instantly. A violent, nauseating ripple tore through the cosmic tapestry. The golden weave shuddered as if in agony. He saw the fates turn their veiled faces towards him. He couldn't see their eyes, but he felt their gaze, a blast of cold, timeless fury that transcended space and sound. He had done more than save a life. He had defied their design. He had torn a stitch in their perfect creation. And they had noticed. Alecto, recovering from her blow, shrieked, he sees. The anomaly seized the thread. With a final, unified screech of hatred, the three furies dissolved, not into dust, but into shadows, retreating. The threat of the fates was greater than their desire for vengeance. Percy stood, chest heaving, in the wreckage of the bus. Annabeth and Grover stared at him, their faces pale. They had won. They were alive. But Percy knew they had just made a far more powerful enemy. He wasn't just being hunted by monsters anymore. He was being watched by the Weavers of Destiny themselves. And he had just deliberately, irrevocably, tangled their thread. The weight on his shoulders grew heavier, colder, and the road to the underworld seemed infinitely longer. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Whispering Labyrinth. The aftermath of the bus battle was a blur of flashing police lights and the acrid smell of burnt rubber. Percy, Annabeth, and Grover had slipped away into the rain-slicked New Jersey woods, leaving the chaos behind. They moved in silence, the adrenaline of the fight giving way to a grim, weary tension. Annabeth kept glancing at Percy, her analytical mind struggling to reconcile the impossible. He hadn't just fought well, he'd orchestrated the entire battle, calling out the Furies, attacks before they happened. Moving with a prescience that defied all logic and training. "How did you know?" she finally asked, her voice low as they huddled under the relative shelter of a thick pine. Did you know Tisiphone would attack from above?" Percy just looked at her, the crimson of his eyes having faded back to their normal sea green, but the intensity remained. "I see things," he said. The same infuriatingly simple explanation he'd given her before. Patterns. Attack vectors. It's hard to explain. He was being deliberately vague. He couldn't tell her the truth. He couldn't speak of the spinning tomo, the Uchiha, the manga that had somehow bled into his reality. And he certainly couldn't tell her about the vision of the fates, the sickening ripple in their cosmic loom, or the cold fury he had felt directed at him from across reality. A new weight had settled on his shoulders, colder and heavier than any prophecy. He wasn't just on a quest to stop a war, he was an anomaly, a glitch in the system. And the system's administrators were now watching him. Grover, sensing the friction, tried to break the tension. "Well, whatever you did, it was amazing. You were like a whirlwind of goat foo. Except, with a sword." Percy offered a weak smile. He was grateful for Grover's loyalty, for the satyr's simple, unwavering belief in him. He was an anchor in the storm of betrayal and cosmic meddling that Percy's life had become. The vision of Luke's sneer was a constant, burning image in the back of his mind, a reminder that the most dangerous enemies were the ones who smiled to your face. They walked for what felt like hours, a miserable, mud-spattered trio on the run from forces they barely understood. Hunger gnawed at Percy's stomach, a dull ache that competed with the throbbing in his head. It was then that they smelled it. The greasy, intoxicating aroma of frying food. It cut through the damp, earthy scent of the woods, a beacon of impossible warmth and sustenance. Through the trees, they saw a low, sprawling building, its windows glowing with a garish pink neon light, Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium. "Food," Grover bleated, his eyes wide with longing. Annabeth was more cautious. "This is weird. A place like this in the middle of nowhere." Percy said nothing. His sharingan was already tingling, a low hum of warning behind his eyes. He saw the building, but he also saw the aura around it, a stagnant, dusty gray, laced with threads of ancient bitterness and profound loneliness. He could smell the burgers, yes, but beneath that, there was a faint, cloying scent of decay and old stone. "Let's be careful," Percy said, his hand resting on Riptide in his pocket. Inside, the place was a bizarre maze of statues. Garden gnomes, satyrs, demigods. Even a few terrified-looking mortals, all frozen in eerily lifelike poses. Their faces were masks of pure, unadulterated terror. A woman emerged from the back, hidden in shadow. She wore a heavy veil and a long, shapeless black dress. "So nice to have visitors," she rasped, her voice like grinding stones. "You must be so tired. So hungry. Please, come in. I will make you something to eat." Grover and Annabeth, driven by hunger and exhaustion, started to move forward. Percy's arm shot out, stopping them. "We're fine," he said, his eyes scanning the room, deliberately avoiding the woman's veiled face. His sharingan, now active with a single tomo, saw everything else with painful clarity. He saw the faint traces of dust motes settling on the statues, unblinking eyes. He saw the subtle, almost invisible layer of fine, gray powder on the floor. He saw the aura of the woman in black, a writhing, serpentine mass of cold, petrified rage. "Nonsense," Child, the woman said, her voice taking on a harder edge. She took a step forward, into the light. A hero's quest is draining work. You must replenish your strength. Annabeth gasped, her hand flying to her knife. Grover let out a terrified bleat. Even without Percy's vision, they recognized her now from the myths. The hissing. It wasn't coming from the deep fryer. It was coming from the woman's head, where a mass of writhing, living snakes replaced her hair. Medusa. Annabeth. Grover, Percy said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding tone. Do not look at her. Keep your eyes on the floor. Listen to your clever little friend, Medusa hissed. A cruel smile twisting her lips. She locked her gaze on Percy. A son of Poseidon. I should have known. He was the one who cursed me, you know. He and that wretched Athena. They turned me into this masterpiece. Quote. She gestured to herself, her snake hair writhing in agitation. Percy kept his own eyes averted, focusing instead on the polished surface of a decorative steel globe near the counter. In its curved reflection, he could see her perfectly. He watched her movements, her posture, the way the snakes on her head mirrored her growing fury. But a new age is dawning, Medusa continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She saw the power in Percy, the calm he projected, and mistook it for something she could use. The new dawn is coming. A power that will sweep away the vain, squabbling Olympians. They offer a place for those who have been wronged, for beings like us. There is no reason for us to be enemies. Join us. Together, we could turn them all to stone. The new dawn. The name Medusa had used at the museum. It wasn't just a random faction, it was an organized movement, actively recruiting. Percy filed the information away. We'll pass, he said, his eyes still fixed on her reflection in the globe. He saw her anger spike, her posture tensing for an attack. She thought he was trapped, a boy afraid to meet her gaze. A pity, she hissed, and lunged. She was fast, but in the reflection, Percy saw the lunge before it happened. He didn't need to see her directly. He could perceive her from the currents of air she displaced, sound of her scales slithering across the floor, the intense, cold spot her aura created in the room. He moved. Riptide was in his hand, the celestial bronze blade a blur. He didn't engage in a drawn-out fight. He didn't parry or block. He saw his one, perfect opportunity. As she lunged past him, her head exposed, he spun on his heel, his body low to the ground. He swung his sword in a single, clean, horizontal arc. There was a sickening, wet crunch, and a final, surprised hiss. Medusa's head, its snake hair still writhing, flew through the air and landed with a thud in a pile of packing peanuts. Her body stood for a moment, swaying, before collapsing into a mountain of golden monster dust. Silence. Grover was whimpering, his eyes squeezed shut. Annabeth was staring at the monster dust, her face pale but her eyes wide with a new level of respect. Percy walked over to the head, his gaze still averted, and wrapped it carefully in the black veil Medusa had been wearing. He found a box and some packing slips in the back office. What are you doing? Annabeth asked, her voice trembling slightly. Sending a message, Percy said, his voice cold and hard. He addressed the package to the gods, Mount Olympus, 600th floor, Empire State Building, New York, New York. He included a note, with the compliments of Percy Jackson. He was done being a pawn. He was done being their errand boy. If they wanted to treat him like a suspect, he would act like one. He would show them he wasn't afraid, that their games had consequences. He dropped the box at a nearby post office, paying for overnight shipping with the mortal money he'd found in Medusa's desk. It was an act of pure, unadulterated defiance. And it felt good. The train ride to St. Louis was a tense affair. They were fugitives, traveling on money stolen from a monster, with a gorgon's head in a box in the luggage compartment. Percy spent most of the ride staring out the window, but he wasn't watching the scenery. He was replaying the prophecy in his mind. The vision of Luke's betrayal a constant, bitter presence. It made him wary, guarded. Annabeth tried to break through his silence, engaging him in a game of strategy. Setting up hypothetical battle scenarios. He played along, his mind sharp, his tactical sense unnervingly acute. He countered her best strategies with moves she'd never even considered. Where did you learn to think like that? She asked, genuinely impressed, after he'd cornered her imaginary army for the third time. I read a lot, he said simply. Their intellectual sparring was interrupted by a new, more immediate threat. As the train pulled into Street Louis, Percy felt a familiar prickle of warning. A young man, barely older than them, with the hard, muscular build of an Aries camper and cold, merciless eyes, was watching them from the end of the car. He wore a simple leather necklace, from which hung a small, iron charm, a single, broken chain link. The symbol of the new dawn. Percy's hand tightened on his pen. This wasn't a monster. This was a demigod, an assassin. They disembarked, trying to lose him in the crowd, but he was good, sticking to them like a shadow. They made their way to the gateway arch, hoping the public space would deter an attack. It didn't. On the observation deck, high above the city, the assassin cornered them. The few other tourists present were a mother and her young son, with a tiny, yapping chihuahua. Perseus Jackson, the assassin said, his voice a low growl. Aris sends her regards. The new dawn cannot abide a rogue element with your unique talents. His eyes flickered with a strange, analytical light as he looked at Percy, as if he knew something about the sharingan. He drew a wicked-looking gladius, its blade serrated like a shark's tooth. My name is Lysoun, and your quest ends here. Annabeth and Grover drew their own weapons, but Percy motioned for them to stay back. This was his fight. Lysoun charged. He was fast, strong, and fought with a brutal efficiency that spoke of years of training. He was better than any camper Percy had faced. But he wasn't prepared for the sharingan. Percy's eyes blazed, 3 tomo spinning. He read every move Lysoun made. The flex of a bicep, the twitch of a wrist, the shift of weight onto a back foot. He didn't just counter the attacks, he moved before the attacks were even fully formed. But Lysoun was smart. He realized he couldn't win with pure skill. So he changed the game. You're good, Jackson, he grunted, their blades locked. But are you a hero? That's when the chihuahua started to grow. The yapping turned into a guttural roar as the dog swelled in size, its fur becoming a shaggy, lion-like mane, its tail sprouting a venomous snake's head. The chimera, its owner, the woman, also transformed. Her skin becoming scaly, her legs fusing into 2 massive, reptilian trunks. Echidna, the mother of monsters. Chaos erupted on the observation deck. Echidna cackled, her forked tongue flicking out. A test, little goatling. Let's see if you are worthy. The chimera breathed a gout of fire, blasting a hole in the side of the arch. The structure groaned, metal screaming under the strain. Mortals screamed in terror. Lysoun used the distraction to press his attack, but his goal had changed. He wasn't trying to kill Percy anymore. He was trying to keep him occupied. He was forcing Percy into an impossible choice. Fight me, or save them. Percy saw it all in a fraction of a second. Lysoun's determined face. The terrified mother and child, trapped by the flames. The chimera, its snake tail coiling, ready to strike with its venomous fangs. The groaning, failing structure of the arch. He made his choice. With a powerful shove, he pushed Lysoun back, breaking their engagement. We're not done, Percy snarled, his eyes promising a future reckoning. Lysoun just smirked and, with surprising agility, scrambled through the new hole in the arch, rappelling down. The side with a practiced skill that proved this had all been part of the plan. Percy didn't watch him go. He turned to face the chimera. He got the mother and child behind him, his body a shield against the monster's heat. Annabeth, get them out of here. Grover, help her. The chimera lunged, its lion claws tearing through the metal floor. Percy dodged, riptide flashing. He managed to score a hit on its flank. But the monster was too powerful. Its snake tail whipped around, faster than he could react, and a sharp, searing pain exploded in his leg as its fangs sank deep into his calf. Poison, white-hot and immediate, it flooded his system. His vision swam, the edges turning dark. His strength was failing. He knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he couldn't win this fight. Not like this. He stumbled back, his leg giving way. He was at the edge of the hole the chimera had created, the wind whipping around him, the city a dizzying panorama hundreds of feet below. The Mississippi River, a muddy, brown ribbon, snaked its way through the landscape. Water, he thought, his mind latching onto a single, desperate hope. My father's domain. It was a crazy, suicidal gamble. But it was the only one he had. He met the chimera's burning gaze, and with the last of his strength, he yelled, "If you want me, you overgrown lizard, come and get me." He turned and leapt out of the hole. He fell. The wind screamed in his ears. The poison burned in his veins. The world was a spinning, nauseating blur of sky and steel. As unconsciousness threatened to claim him, his sharingan flared, one last, desperate act of perception. The world of golden threads reappeared, but this time, he saw something new. From the river below, a single, impossibly bright, sea-green thread of power was rising to meet him. It wasn't the cold, indifferent gold of the fates. This thread was warm, powerful, and deeply, fiercely paternal. He saw a vision, not of a man on a throne, but of a vast, ethereal sense composed of the ocean itself, of crushing depths and life-giving currents. He felt a wave of ancient, powerful concern wash over him, a silent voice that seemed to say, "Hold on, my son." It was the first, true connection he had ever felt with his father. Then he hit the water, and the world went black. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Gambler's Eye. The Mississippi River spat him out like a foul taste. Percy gasped, coughing up a lungful of murky water, the world a blurry, disorienting mess. He was lying on a muddy bank, shivering, his clothes soaked through. The pain in his leg from the chimera's bite was gone, replaced by a strange, tingling warmth. The poison had been purged, washed away by the power of his father's domain. A voice, feminine and ethereal, echoed in his mind, a remnant of his time in the water. "Go to the shore in Santa Monica. It is your father's will. Do not trust the gifts." The message faded, leaving him with more questions than answers. He pushed himself up, his limbs heavy. He felt stronger. The water had not just healed him, it had invigorated him, a surge of latent power awakening in his veins. He looked at his hands, seeing the faint, sea-green aura that now clung to him. A visible sign of his father's blessing. He found Annabeth and Grover by a freight train yard, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and utter disbelief. "Percy," Grover bleated, tackling him in a hug that smelled strongly of wet goat. "We saw you fall. We thought you were dead." Percy finished, his voice rough. Almost was. Annabeth just stared at him, her gray eyes sweeping over him, taking in his healed leg, the new energy radiating from him. Her mind, always working, was trying to process the impossible. "How?" she finally managed to ask. "My dad, I guess," Percy said, shrugging. Though the memory of that warm, paternal presence in the water was anything but casual. He helped. He didn't mention the Nereid's message. The warning about gifts felt specific, personal. Another secret to add to the growing pile. For now, they had a more immediate problem. They were broke, wanted by the police for supposedly blowing up a national monument, and stranded in St. Louis. It was Ares who found them. The god of war roared up to the curb of a diner they'd managed to find, not on a chariot, but on a custom Harley-Davidson that seemed to pulse with a blood-red light. He was a terrifying figure, clad in black leather, with flames dancing behind his mirrored sunglasses. His aura, to Percy's sharingan, was a conflagration of crimson and black, a swirling vortex of pure, unadulterated violence. Being near him was like standing next to a blast furnace. "Jackson," Ares growled, his voice like grinding gravel. "Heard you made a splash." He offered them a deal. A ride west in exchange for a small favor. He'd left his shield at an abandoned water park, and he needed someone to fetch it for him. He was on a date. Annabeth was immediately suspicious. "Why can't you get it yourself?" Quote, Ares's smile was a cruel, predatory slash. "It was a little trap I set up. For my girl, Aphrodite, and her little boyfriend, Hephaestus. Let's just say the Axmith god doesn't like me visiting his wife. The place is rigged." Percy saw the truth in the god's aura. He wasn't lying, but he was withholding. There was a malicious amusement dancing in the flames of his eyes. A sense of throwing lambs to the slaughter just to see what would happen. Percy knew it was a terrible idea. He also knew they had no other choice. "We'll do it," Percy said, cutting off Annabeth's protests. He met the god's fiery gaze. "We get your shield, you get us to the west coast. With supplies." Ares laughed, A harsh, booming sound. Got nerve, kid. I like that. Deal. The water park was a concrete boneyard. A monument to forgotten summer fun. Rusted slides and empty pools lay under the moonlight like the skeletons of great beasts. The place reeked of stale chlorine and, more disturbingly, the faint, metallic scent of divine magic. The shield was at the bottom of the tunnel of love, a dark, creepy ride featuring animatronic cupids with chipped, leering smiles. It's a trap, Annabeth whispered, her eyes scanning the area. Hephaestus is the god of craftsmen and traps. This is a terrible idea. It's the only idea we have, Percy countered, his sharingan active. 3 tomo spinning in the darkness. He could see the faint, golden tracery of magical tripwires crisscrossing the ride's entrance. He saw the pressure plates hidden beneath the dust. But it was more than that. He felt a familiar, unsettling presence. The same cold, analytical aura he had felt from the assassin, Lysound. Someone's here, Percy whispered. New dawn. The mission had just become infinitely more complicated. It wasn't just about surviving a divine trap, it was about walking into an ambush. He saw the plan in an instant. Annabeth, you're the expert on architecture and mechanics. You see a way to disable the main trap. She pointed towards a control booth. Maybe, if I can get to the main breaker and disrupt the power flow, it might reset the sequence. Grover, I need you on lookout. High ground, he said, pointing to the top of a giant water slide. Anything moves, you give us a signal. He turned back to the tunnel of love. I'll get the shield. As his friends moved out, Percy entered the tunnel. He didn't need light. His sharingan adjusted to the gloom, painting the world in shades of red and gray. He moved with a dancer's grace, stepping over trip W. Iris his naked eye would never have seen, avoiding pressure plates with pinpoint precision. He found the shield leaning against a statue of a smirking Cupid. As his fingers brushed against the cold metal, the trap sprang. Not because he'd tripped a wire, but because it was designed to activate the moment the shield was touched. Clanking, grinding sounds echoed through the tunnel as 1,000 tiny, bronze spiders, automatons of Hephaestus, began to pour out of the walls, their metallic legs clicking on the concrete. They swarmed towards him, their eyes glowing with a malevolent red light. At the same time, from the other end of the tunnel, Lysound appeared, his serrated blade drawn. I knew you couldn't resist the heroics, Jackson, he sneered. Aris was right, you're predictable. Outside, Annabeth had managed to short out the main trap, preventing the ride from collapsing or flooding, but the spiders were on a secondary power source. Grover was bleating a warning from the waterslide, having spotted Lysound's approach. Percy was trapped, a demigod assassin in front of him, an army of mechanical spiders behind him. He didn't panic. He analyzed. The spiders were a swarm, but they were mindless. Lysound was intelligent, but overconfident. He was the real threat. Percy used the spiders. He grabbed the shield and charged, not at Lysound, but through the swarm. The automatons latched onto his legs, their tiny metal jaws trying to find purchase, but he kicked and stomped, crushing them underfoot. He reached the water flume, the concrete channel that the boats were supposed to float on. With a roar, he focused his will, summoning every drop of residual water in the park's ancient pipes. A torrent of brackish, foul-smelling water erupted into the tunnel, washing the spiders away in a wave of metal and rust. Lysound, caught by surprise, was knocked off his feet. Percy was on him in an instant, riptide at his throat. Their duel was short and brutal. Lysound was skilled, but Percy's sharingan gave him an insurmountable advantage. He saw every parry, every thrust. He wasn't just defending. He was teaching himself, his blade work becoming more fluid, more deadly, with every passing second. Copying and refining Lysound's own style. He disarmed him with a flick of his wrist, sending the serrated blade skittering into the darkness. Who is Aris? Percy demanded, the P of his sword pressing against Lysound's throat. What does the new dawn want with the bolt? Lysound just laughed, a broken, defiant sound. You think this is about a lightning bolt? This is about tearing down a corrupt system, Jackson. Aris will burn Olympus to the ground and build a better world from the ashes. A world where the strong rule, not the spoiled, lazy children of Kronos. Before Percy could press him for more, Lysound bit down hard on something in his mouth. A pained hiss, and his body went limp, a dark, foul-smelling smoke rising from his lips. Poison. He'd taken his own life rather than be captured. Percy stared down at the body, a cold knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't just a quest anymore. He was caught in the opening salvos of a second, secret war, a war of ideology. And the new dawn was not made up of mindless monsters, it was made up of zealots, demigods willing to die for their cause. That made them infinitely more dangerous. They returned the shield to Ares, who gave them a grudging nod of respect. He loaded them into the back of an 18-wheeler hauling live animals, keeping his end of the bargain. Their destination: Las Vegas. The truck dropped them at the edge of the city, a sprawling oasis of light and noise in the middle of the desert. They were exhausted, battered, and on edge. The encounter with Lysoun had shaken them. "We need to rest," Annabeth said, her voice strained. "Just for a few hours. We're no good to the quest if we collapse from exhaustion." It was then that they saw it, rising from the desert floor like a crystalline palace, its lights beckoning to them. Was the Lotus Hotel and Casino. "Whoa," Grover said, his eyes wide. "Maybe we could just use the bathroom." As they approached the entrance, Percy felt it again. A strange, powerful aura. But this one was different from the violent crimson of Ares or the musty gray of Medusa. This was a soft, shimmering pinkish gold, a gentle, welcoming energy that seemed to promise comfort, safety, and an end to all their worries. It was seductive. It was also, his sharingan warned him, profoundly, terrifyingly wrong. The moment they stepped through the automatic doors, the feeling intensified. It was a full sensory assault. The air smelled of lotus blossoms and clean linen. The sound was a pleasant, constant hum of laughter, quiet conversations, and the gentle chiming of slot machines. People of all ages milled about, smiling, relaxed, without a care in the world. "This place is nice," Grover said, his tense posture relaxing for the first time in days. Annabeth, too, seemed to let her guard down, her ever-present frown softening. "Yeah, it is." Percy, however, felt a deep, piercing sense of unease. His sharingan cut through the glamour. He saw the pie-enkish gold aura clinging to every patron, a thick, cloying fog that seemed to dull their senses, to smooth over the rough edges of their memories. He looked at the golden threads of fate that connected them all. And what he saw made his blood run cold. They were not moving forward. They were shimmering, yes, but they were static, caught in an infinite, repeating loop. These people weren't living. They were paused. A bellhop in a crisp, white uniform glided towards them. "Welcome to the Lotus Hotel. We've been expecting you. Your suite is ready." He handed them a platinum key card. Annabeth and Grover, their eyes glazed over, took it without question. Percy watched them, a knot of dread tightening in his gut. The pink fog was already starting to coalesce around them. The suite was bigger than his mother's apartment. It had a fully stocked snack bar, a massive entertainment system with every game imaginable, and a view of the entire Las Vegas Strip. Grover immediately found a virtual reality nature simulator and was soon happily munching on virtual tin cans. Annabeth, a look of pure, unadulterated joy on her face, discovered an architectural design game so complex and realistic it made her eyes shine. Percy walked to the window. He looked down at the city, at the cars moving on the streets, the people bustling on the sidewalks. He could see their threads, flowing, moving, progressing. Then he looked back at his friends, at the looping, stagnant threads that now bound them. The contrast was horrifying. This place was a trap far more insidious than anything Hephaestus could build. It didn't kill the body. It consumed the soul, trapping it in a perfect, timeless moment of contentment. He tried to talk to them, to shake them out of it, but his words seemed to slide off their consciousness. They would nod, smile, and then immediately turn back to their games, their minds already lost in the casino's embrace. He had to find the source. He left the suite, his sharingan on full alert, 3 tomo spinning in each eye. He walked through the casino floor, a ghost of clarity in a sea of blissful ignorance. He saw a man in a 70s leisure suit hitting a jackpot on a slot machine, his celebration a perfect, soundless loop. He saw a girl in 90s grunge attire perfectly beating a dance machine, her movements repeating every 45 seconds. They were all trapped, each in their own personal heaven. He followed the flow of the pinkish gold energy to its source, a private lounge at the very back of the casino, hidden behind a velvet rope. The sign read, "The Elysian Fields." Inside, a man sat in a plush armchair, observing the casino on a series of monitors. He was young, with kind, sleepy eyes and a gentle smile. He wore a simple silk robe, and the aura around him was the purest, most concentrated form of the casino's energy. It flowed from him like a fountain. "Perseus Jackson," the man said, his voice soft and soothing, like a lullaby. "I was wondering when you would seek me out. I am Lethus. Welcome to my little sanctuary." "What is this place?" Percy demanded, his hand on riptide. "A kindness," Lethus said with a serene smile. "I offer an escape. The life of a demigod is pain. Is it not? Quests, monsters, prophecies, betrayal, a constant struggle, only to end in tragedy. Here, there is no pain, no struggle, only peace, only happiness, forever." He gestured to a screen showing Annabeth, her face alight with creative joy as she designed a flawless, impossible temple. "Is she not happy? When was the last time you saw her look so peaceful?" Percy felt a pang of doubt. Annabeth did look happy, truly, deeply happy. Lethus seemed to sense his hesitation. "I can offer you the same, son of Poseidon. An end to your burdens." The air in the room shimmered. The lounge dissolved, and Percy was standing in his mother's apartment. But it was different. It was bright, clean. And his mother was there, at the stove, humming, making his favorite blue cookies. She turned and smiled at him, her face free from worry, from the sadness that had haunted her eyes for years. "Percy, you're home early," she said, her voice warm and real. It felt real. The smell of the cookies, the warmth of the room, the love in his mother's eyes. His sharingan screamed at him that it was a lie, a sophisticated illusion, a genjutsu of the highest order. But his heart ached for it to be true. This was the one thing he wanted more than anything. To have failed, yes, but to have his mother back. To have a normal life. "This is what you could have," Lethus's voice whispered in his ear. "No quest, no war, no prophecy of failure. Just this. Forever." The illusion was perfect, but Percy's sharingan saw the one flaw. His mother's thread of fate. It was golden, yes, but it was cut. Severed. The prophecy had shown him her end. This vision, as beautiful as it was a hollow echo. A lie. With a force of will that felt like tearing his own heart in two, Percy shattered the illusion. "It's not real." The apartment dissolved, and he was back in the lounge. Lethus's smile had faded slightly, replaced by a look of genuine pity. "Your clarity is a curse, child. It forces you to see the world's ugliness. Why would you choose that over this beautiful dream?" "Because the dream isn't mine," Percy said, his voice raw. "And it isn't theirs either." He knew he couldn't fight Lethus directly. The god's power was too subtle, too pervasive. He couldn't force his friends to leave. He had to make them choose to leave. He had to show them the truth. He walked back out onto the casino floor, his mind racing. He couldn't project a lie like Lethus. But maybe he could project the truth. He focused, channeling the power of his sharingan, not to see, but to broadcast. He walked up to the grunge girl, still lost in her dance game. He met her glazed-over eyes and focused his will, pushing a memory into her mind. Not a complex illusion, but a single, potent image. The face of her mother, tears streaming down her cheeks, years ago, when she had first run away from home. The girl faltered, her perfect dance steps stumbling. Her eyes cleared for a moment, a flicker of confusion and pain breaking through the fog. "Mom," she whispered. He moved to the man in the leisure suit. He projected the feeling of the sun on his skin, the smell of salt in the air at a beach he had once loved, a memory Percy plucked from the man's own dormant mind. The man stopped pulling the lever on the slot machine, a distant, longing look on his face. He couldn't save them all. The spell was too strong, their own desire to stay too powerful. But he gathered a small, ragtag group, the grunge girl, whose name was Darlene, the disco man, a 90s-era demigo. Named Nico D'Angelo, and his sister Bianca, who had only recently arrived, by showing them slivers of the world they had forgotten. He used his sharingan as a key, unlocking the cages of their own memories. He led his small, confused flock back to his suite. He stood before Annabeth and Grover, his eyes blazing with crimson light. He didn't show them pain. He showed them their shared quest. The flash of the Furies, wings on the bus. The cold satisfaction of mailing Medusa's head to Olympus. The desperate fight at the Arch. He reminded them of their purpose, of the bonds they had forged in battle. Annabeth blinked, the controller falling from her hands. The complex, perfect temple on the screen flickered and vanished. The quest, she whispered, her gray eyes sharp and focused once more. The solstice. What year is it? 5 days. They had lost 5 days. The summer solstice was tomorrow. They fled. They ran through the casino, Percy leading the way, his small group of rescued demigods in tow. Lethus appeared before them at the exit, his face a mask of sorrowful disappointment. "You would choose that world of pain over my paradise?" he asked, his voice echoing with a sad, gentle power. "It's our world," Percy said, meeting his gaze. "And it's real. That's what matters." Percy's unshakable resolve, the absolute clarity in his sharingan-lit eyes, seemed to strike the god like a physical blow. Lethus's own illusion of kindness, his belief that he was offering a mercy, began to fracture under the weight of Percy's truth. The god's form flickered, the gentle smile faltering, revealing the lonely, forgotten being beneath. They burst out of the doors and into the harsh, unforgiving light of the desert sun. Behind them, the magic of the Lotus Casino seemed to dim, its seductive song fading. They had escaped the gilded cage. But the quest, which had once seemed difficult, was now a frantic, desperate race against time. They had one day to get to Los Angeles, find the entrance to the underworld, confront a god, and prevent a war that would tear the world apart. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Underworld's Shadow. The journey from Las Vegas to Los Angeles was a frantic, desperate blur. The 5 days they had lost in the Lotus Casino hung over them like a shroud, each ticking second a hammer blow counting down to a war that would scar the world. Percy pushed them relentlessly, his usual quiet intensity now honed to a razor's edge. He moved with a grim, forward-facing purpose that left no room for rest or complaint. He bought bus tickets with cash from a pawned casino meal voucher. His eyes constantly scanning the crowds, not for monsters, but for the subtle tells of demigods, for the broken chain-link symbol of the new dawn. Annabeth and Grover were still reeling, the seductive fog of the casino having left a residue of confusion and shame. They followed Percy's lead without question, his absolute certainty a rock in their sea of disorientation. The small group of demigods he had pulled from the casino's grasp, Darlene, the grunge girl, and the 2 young siblings, Bianca and Nico D'Angelo, were a complication. They were dazed, their memories of the outside world fragmented and decades out of date. At a bus station in Barstow, under the buzzing fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee, Percy made a decision. He pulled the 3 of them aside. "I can't take you with me," he said, his voice low but firm. He looked at Darlene. "You said your mother was in Phoenix. Go to her." He pressed a wad of cash into her hand. He then turned to Bianca and Nico, who huddled together, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. He saw their threads of fate, dark and intertwined with a grim, shadowy power he didn't recognize. "There's a camp for kids like us on Long Island. It's a safe place." He gave them the address for Camp Half-Blood, along with the rest of his cash. "Tell them Percy Jackson sent you. Find Grover Underwood. He'll look after you." It was a risk, sending them off alone, but taking them on his quest was a greater one. Bianca nodded, her expression grateful and determined, clutching her little brother's hand. As they walked away, Nico glanced back, his dark, curious eyes lingering on Percy for a moment longer than necessary. Percy felt a strange, cold premonition, a flicker in the boy's thread that hinted at a future of profound darkness and power. He pushed the thought aside. He had his own dark destiny to worry about. They arrived in Santa Monica as the sun began its final, dramatic plunge into the Pacific, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The solstice. The deadline was hours away. The salty air was cool on Percy's skin, and as he walked to the edge of the surf, he felt a surge of energy, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to rise from the waves themselves, welcoming him home. "Go to the shore in Santa Monica. It is your father's will." The Nereid's words echoed in his mind. He waded into the crashing waves, the cold water a shocking, invigorating embrace. He closed his eyes, reaching out with his senses, and felt the immense, ancient power of the ocean answer him. The water around him began to glow with a soft, sea-green light. A figure shimmered into existence before him, a woman whose form was woven from sea foam and twilight. It was the same Nereid who had spoken to him in the Mississippi. "You have been brave, son of Poseidon," she said, her voice the sound of waves on sand. "Your father is proud, but your quest is not over, and the path through the land of the dead is not meant for the living." Quote, she held out her hand. Resting in her palm were 3 perfect, milky white pearls, each shimmering with an inner luminescence. "Your father sends these," the Nereid explained. "When you are in need, smash one at your feet. It will protect you. It will bring you out of the depths." Percy looked at the pearls, then back at the spirit. A cold knot of suspicion tightened in his gut. Do not trust the gifts. The same Nereid who had given him that warning was now handing him a gift. His sharingan, active in the dim light, saw the pearls not just as beautiful objects, but as constructs of immense power. And woven into their magical matrix, almost too subtle to detect, was a layer of compulsion. A faint, golden filigree of energy that felt chillingly familiar. It was the energy of the fates. This wasn't just a gift from his father. It was a tool, a pre-packaged solution designed to guide him, to force his hand, to ensure a specific outcome. The fates were using his father's own power, his own love for his son, to put him back on their preordained path. He took the pearls. "Thank my father for me," he said, his voice a carefully controlled neutral. He would play their game, but he would play it by his own rules. The entrance to the underworld was, of course, in Los Angeles. DOA Recording Studios, a grim, black-painted building in the heart of Hollywood, had a lobby that felt more like a funeral parlor. The security guard was a tall, skeletal figure in an Italian suit, his skin translucent over his bones, his face exuding an aura of eternal, soul-crushing boredom. It was Charon, the ferryman of the dead. He was unimpressed by their story, their quest, their very existence. "No exceptions," he droned, his voice dry as dust. "Passages paid in full. In advance." Annabeth and Grover looked at Percy, expecting a fight, or at least a lengthy, frustrating negotiation. Percy simply watched the ancient being, his sharingan taking in the ferryman's aura. The millennia of repetition that had worn his spirit smooth like a river stone. He saw the faint, flickering embers of memory deep within him, memories of a world of sunlight, of green riverbanks. Of a time before this endless, gray routine. Percy stepped forward. "We have payment," he said, and reached into his pocket, pulling out a handful of golden drachmas they'd taken from Medusa's office. He placed them on the counter. Charon barely glanced at them. "Not enough for 3. "That's just the down payment," Percy said, his voice dropping slightly. He met the ferryman's empty gaze, and pushed. He didn't project a grand illusion, just a single, perfect, stolen memory. Not one of his own, but one he'd glimpsed from the torrent of souls in the Mississippi. It was a memory of a sunset over the River Po in Italy, the water a sheet of liquid gold, the air warm and smelling of cypress and rosemary. Charon froze. His skeletal fingers, which had been tapping impatiently on the counter, went still. A flicker of something ancient and long forgotten, not emotion, but the echo of one, passed through his hollow eyes. For a fraction of a second, the gray aura around him was tinged with a faint, golden hue. "The rest of our payment," Percy continued softly, "as a promise. When we succeed, we will petition the gods to give you a day off. One day, every year, to see the sun again." It was an impossible promise, a wild gamble, but it was something new. Something no soul had ever offered him. Charon stared at him for a long, silent moment. "Get on the boat," he rasped, and swept the drachmas into his drawer. The boat ride across the river Styx was a journey through despair. Hands of the damned reached from the black, oily water, their silent screams echoing in Percy's mind. He used his power, creating a small, protective current around the boat, pushing the grasping souls away. The far shore was a black beach of volcanic sand. In the distance, through a perpetual twilight, stood the gates of the underworld, and guarding them was a beast of nightmare. Cerberus, the 3-headed dog, was larger than a woolly mammoth, a monstrous shadow of muscle and fang. Annabeth had a plan. A red rubber ball from the water park. A game of fetch. It was a brave, clever, and utterly inadequate idea. As they approached, Cerberus's 3 heads rose, its 6 eyes, glowing like hot coals, fixing on them. A low, rumbling growl that shook the ground vibrated through Percy's bones. "Now," Annabeth whispered, and threw the ball. One of the heads, with a curious, almost playful look, followed the ball. But the other 2 were fixed on the intruders, their lips curling back to reveal dagger-like teeth. Percy saw past the monster. His sharingan perceived the creature's true nature. It wasn't just a beast of mindless rage. It was a guard, yes, but it was also profoundly, eternally lonely, trapped at its post for eons. "Annabeth, keep that head busy," he yelled, drawing Riptide. He didn't charge. He ran to the river's edge, plunging his hands into the black water. He focused, not on violence, but on creation. The water of the Styx was full of sorrow and pain, but it was still water. He drew it up, shaping it, purifying it with his own will. A sphere of shimmering, cool, clear water materialized in his hands. It swirled with a gentle, inner light, a star. Contrast to the oppressive gloom of the underworld. He threw it towards the 2 aggressive heads. The sphere splashed harmlessly against the center head's nose. The beast flinched, surprised. Then, a low, inquisitive whine rumbled in its massive chest. It sniffed at the dissipating globe of water, its huge tongue flicking out to taste the pure, clean essence, so alien in this place of decay. Percy created another sphere, then another, tossing them for the other heads to catch. It was a game, a better game than fetch. The monstrous guard dog, for the first time in centuries, was playing. Its rumbling growl softened into something that almost sounded like a purr. They slipped past him, Annabeth looking at Percy with an expression of sheer, unadulterated awe. He hadn't defeated the monster. He had befriended it. Hades's palace was a fortress of obsidian and bone, radiating a cold, majestic power. The throne room was a vast cavern, its walls embedded with the glittering, raw jewels of the earth. And on a throne of fused human skeletons sat the Lord of the Dead. He was a giant of a man, with skin as pale as bleached bone and eyes like black fire. His aura was a swirling storm of ancient grief, royal pride, and a rage that felt as old and as deep as the earth itself. His helm of darkness, his symbol of power, was missing from its stand beside him. Perseus Jackson, Hades's voice was soft, yet it filled the cavern. Resonating in Percy's bones, the bold little thief. Behind him, 2 other thrones sat empty, but Percy's sharingan saw the faint, lingering impressions of air occupants. One of a young woman radiating the warmth of spring, and the other of an older woman, a mirror of Hades's own regal, sorrowful power. "Persephone and Demeter, I'm not a thief," Percy said, his voice steady. He met the god's fiery gaze without flinching. "You have the audacity to come here, after stealing my helm of darkness, and now you deny stealing my brother's bolt as well." Hades's voice rose, the jewels on the walls vibrating with his anger. "I didn't steal your helm," Percy said. "And I don't have the Master B." He stopped. The backpack Ares had given them, which Grover was holding, suddenly felt incredibly heavy. A dark, malevolent energy began to pulse from it, an energy that was sickeningly familiar. Hades's eyes narrowed. "Open it." Grover, trembling, opened the bag. Inside, nestled amongst their spare clothes, was the Master Bolt. It was a 2-foot-long cylinder of celestial bronze, humming with power, crackling with ozone, throwing off sparks of raw, hot energy that lit the cavern with the light of a miniature sun. The trap was sprung. They had been played perfectly. Annabeth gasped. Grover bleated in terror. But Percy's mind was a vortex of cold calculation. He saw the threads of fate tightening around him, forcing him into the role of the villain, the pawn. He saw the triumph in Hades's eyes, the certainty that he had caught his thief red-handed. Fighting was not an option. Arguing was pointless. He had only one weapon left. The truth. "You've been manipulated, Lord Hades," Percy said, taking a step forward. "Have I?" The god sneered. "Yes," Percy said, "and I can prove it." He closed his eyes for a second, focusing his will, gathering his power. It was an immense risk, an incredible strain. He had never attempted anything on this scale before. He opened his eyes, the 3 tomo in each spinning into a furious blur. He looked directly at the Lord of the Dead. "See for yourself," he commanded, and pushed a lifetime of truth into the god's mind. It wasn't an attack, it was an offering, a perfect, incorruptible memory stream. Hades's consciousness was flooded with images, sounds, and sensations, all from Percy's perspective. He saw Medusa, her serpentine hair writhing as she spoke of the new dawn. He saw the assassin Lysaon, the broken chain-linked symbol on his necklace, his dying words about Eris and a world in ashes. He saw the raw, violent, smug aura of Ares at the diner, the malicious glee dancing in the god's essence as he handed Percy the backpack. He showed Hades every piece of the puzzle, every clue that pointed away from a simple theft and towards a grand conspiracy. Hades recoiled on his throne, his hands flying to his temples as if struck by a physical blow. The projection ended. The god stared at Percy, his black fire eyes wide with a dawning, horrified understanding. He, the king of the underworld, the master of his own domain, had been used as a pawn by the petty, giggling goddess of discord. The rage in the room didn't lessen, it intensified, but its direction shifted. Eris, Hades whispered, his voice a low, terrifying growl. Ares, they dare. He looked at Percy, his expression no longer one of a judge, but of a fellow monarch who had been grievously insulted. You speak the truth. I see that now, but this changes little. You still hold the bolt. And my helm is still missing. Ares has it. I can feel his foul stench on your quest. Suddenly, a shimmering, insubstantial form appeared beside the throne. It was his mother, Sally Jackson, her spirit bound by Hades's power, her face pale and frightened. I will have my helm, Hades stated, his voice cold as a tomb. The bolt is your problem. Leave now, and retrieve my property, and I will release your mother's soul. Fail, and she will remain here. A permanent guest. The pearls. The fates. Trap. It snapped shut with an audible click. 3 pearls. 3 of them. His mother would make 4. You shall fail to save what matters most, in the end. The words of the prophecy mocked him, their meaning now agonizingly clear. He could not save her. Not now. The fates had woven it so. The gift was a cage, designed to force this exact, heartbreaking choice. He looked at his mother's frightened face, and a pain sharper than any poison lanced through his heart. Then he looked at Annabeth and Grover, their faces pale, their lives in his hands. The world was on the brink of war. Billions of lives hung in the balance. There was no choice. There was only duty. His face became a mask of stone, his sea-green eyes hardening into chips of ice. He reached into his pocket and pulled out one of the pearls. I will get your helm, he said to Hades, his voice devoid of emotion. But the war between your brothers comes first. I'm not your errand boy. He met his mother's eyes one last time. I'm sorry. I will come back for you. I promise. He didn't say the words, but he projected the thought, a final, desperate message. He looked at his friends. Get ready. He threw the pearl to the ground. It shattered with the sound of a thunderclap, and the world dissolved into a maelstrom of roaring water and sea-green light. They materialized on the Santa Monica beach, drenched in saltwater, staggering in the sand under a blood-red sunset. The solstice was ending, and waiting for them, leaning against his monstrous motorcycle, his flaming eyes glinting behind his sunglasses, was Ares. The god of war held a twisted, dark helmet in his hands, the helm of darkness. He tossed it into the sand at Percy's feet. Took you long enough, punk, Ares snarled. I was getting bored. The confrontation that followed was not a duel. It was an execution. Ares came at him, a blur of rage and divine power, his massive two-handed sword swinging in an arc meant to cleave Percy in two. But Percy wasn't the same boy who had stumbled into camp 2 weeks ago. His sharingan was a raging fire. He saw it all. The tightening of Ares's shoulder muscles. The infinitesimal shift in his footing, the path of the sword. The god was all power, all aggression, and in his rage, he was as predictable as a tidal wave. Percy flowed around him. He didn't try to block the blow. He ducked under it, the wind from the massive blade stirring his hair. He moved like water, using the god's own momentum to carry him past. Riptide was a blur, not aiming for a killing blow, but for the gaps in the god's armor, the nerves in his wrist, the tendons behind his knee. Ares roared in frustration, swinging again and again, but his blows met only air. Percy was a phantom, always just out of reach, his bronze blade a constant, annoying presence, landing small, stinging cuts that served only to enrage the god further. He used the ocean, summoning waves not to crash, but to surge up the beach, turning the sand to treacherous, sucking mud, ruining Ares' footing. He pulled mist from the air, obscuring the god's vision. He was fighting like a shinobi, not a hoplite. "Stand still and fight me," Ares bellowed, his faceplate glowing with heat. "You first," Percy shot back, appearing behind him and landing a solid kick to the back of his knee, sending the god stumbling. He was humiliating him. He was making the god of war look like a clumsy, brutish child. He saw the dark energy around Ares, the influence of a greater, more subtle power that was fueling his rage, making him sloppy. Aris's influence. The final blow was one of pure, calculated insult. Percy summoned a massive wave, a wall of water that rose 20 feet into the air. Ares braced himself, planting his feet, ready to meet the crushing force head-on. But it was a feint. As the god's attention was fixed on the wave, Percy darted in low, under his guard. Riptide was in his left hand, a distraction. In his right, he clutched the jagged, broken horn of the Minotaur. He drove the point of the horn into the one tiny gap in the god's divine armor, his heel. It wasn't a deep wound, but it was profound. Ichor, the golden blood of the gods, welled up, sizzling in the sand. A mortal weapon, a trophy taken from a beast, had wounded the immortal god of war. Ares howled, a sound of pure, shocked agony and disbelief. He stared at his heel, then at Percy, his flaming eyes filled with a new, deeper hatred. The dark energy around him receded, the outside influence broken by the shock of the wound. "You will pay for this, Jackson," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. "There will be a war, and you will know my wrath." He vanished in a flash of fiery light, leaving behind only the smell of blood and sulfur. The helm of darkness lay in the sand. As Percy stood, panting, drained from the fight and the strain of his powers, a shadow fell over him. Alecto and her two sisters had appeared, their leathery wings beating silently. They did not attack. They bowed their heads, a gesture of grim respect, and took the helm. Before she dissolved into darkness, Alecto's ancient eyes met Percy's. For a moment, he saw not a monster, but a being of cosmic law, and her gaze held a terrifying, unspoken question. "What are you?" He had won. He had the bolt. Hee-haw. D cleared his name with Hades and retrieved the helm. But as the last light of the solstice faded from the sky, the weight of his prophecy crashed down upon him. He had failed to save his mother. He had made an eternal enemy of the god of war. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The God of War's Gambit. The flight to New York was a surreal journey through a world holding its breath. Below them, the country was a patchwork of unnatural weather. Tornadoes tore through Kansas far from their usual season, flash floods inundated deserts. And the skies over the East Coast were a bruised, angry purple, lit by flashes of dry lightning. The argument between Zeus and Poseidon was no longer confined to Olympus, it was bleeding into the mortal world, twisting the climate into a chaotic, primordial tantrum. Annabeth sat rigidly in her seat, poring over a newspaper, her gray eyes cataloging every report of freak storms and unexplained disasters. Grover chewed nervously on his plane ticket, his gaze fixed on the unnatural clouds. Percy, by the window, was a statue of forced calm. He watched the world unravel below, each lightning strike a painful reminder of the bolt humming in his backpack and the war he was flying to prevent. He felt hollowed out. The victory over Ares was a sour, metallic taste in his mouth. He had saved himself, but he had left his mother in the land of the dead. The prophecy's final line was a poison dart in his soul, and you shall fail to save what matters most, in the end. He had faced down gods and monsters, but he had been outmaneuvered by a few lines of ancient poetry, forced into an impossible choice by the unseen weavers of his fate. The anger he felt was a cold, deep thing, a glacier of quiet rage forming in the depths of his being. He wasn't just angry at the fates, he was angry at the entire system, the petty, prideful gods who played games with mortal lives while a real threat, the new dawn, gathered in the shadows. Their arrival in New York was met with a sense of oppressive energy that had nothing to do with the city's usual hustle. The air itself felt charged, heavy, like the moments before a lightning strike. They took a cab to the Empire State Building, the stoic guard in the lobby barely glancing at them before handing them a key card for the 600th floor. He'd seen it all before. The elevator ride was a silent, stomach-churning ascent. There was no music, only the low hum of immense power. As the doors slid open, they were not greeted by a hallway, but by the open air. They stood on a narrow stone path suspended in the clouds, leading to a city of impossible, gleaming architecture that defied gravity. Olympus. Percy's sharingan flared, unbidden, overwhelmed by the sheer sensory input. He saw everything. The city wasn't just made of marble and gold, it was woven from raw belief and divine power. The aura of each building, each street, pulsed with a light that was almost blinding. He saw the interwoven histories, the echoes of ancient triumphs and betrayals, etched into the very stones. The weight of millennia of power pressed down on him, a force that would have crushed a normal demigod. They walked the streets in a stunned silence. Minor gods and nature spirits paused to stare at the three young demigods walking with such grim purpose. The room of the Olympians was at the very peak of the mountain, a vast, open-air chamber that looked out over the heavens. 12 colossal thrones, arranged in an inverted U, dominated the space. And seated upon them were the gods. The sheer scale of them was reality-bending. They weren't just large people, they were living embodiments of their domains. Zeus, on the central throne, was a storm-given human form. His beard crackling with static electricity, his eyes thunderclouds of rage and suspicion. To his right, a woman of impossible beauty, Hera, watched with cold, regal disdain. And to his left, his father. Poseidon was not the ethereal, watery presence Percy had felt in the river. Here, he was a king in his own right, his skin tanned and weathered like a sea captain's, his eyes the deep, turbulent green of the ocean before a hurricane. He held his trident loosely, but his knuckles were white. The tension between the two brothers was a palpable force, warping the very air between their thrones. The other gods were a gallery of raw power. Apollo's golden radiance was so bright it was hard to look at. Artemis's silver light was cold and sharp as a razor's edge. Hephaestus was a misshapen titan of muscle and machinery, tinkering with a metal automaton. And Athena, her gray eyes an exact, unnerving duplicate of her daughters, watched Percy with an expression of intense, calculating curiosity. "You are late." Zeus's voice was the rumble of distant thunder. "The solstice has passed." Percy walked to the center of the room, the weight of their combined gazes a physical force. He shrugged the backpack from his shoulder and let it fall to the marble floor. He uncapped Riptide, the blade springing to life, then used its tip to open the zipper. He tipped the bag over, and the master bolt rolled out. Its power immediately causing the air in the room to hum and crackle. "You have what you came for," Percy said, his voice quiet but carrying in the vast chamber. "The war is over." Zeus's eyes narrowed. "The war is over when I say it is over. You still have much to answer for. You, the forbidden child, appear at the exact moment the bolt is stolen. You consort with my enemies. You dare to wound a member of this council." From his throne, Ares, looking smaller and paler than he had on the beach, glared at Percy with pure, undiluted hatred. A golden bandage was wrapped around his heel. "I did what was necessary," Percy said, meeting the Storm Lord's gaze without fear. His sharingan was active, a calm, three-tomo spin that allowed him to parse the maelstrom of divine emotions in the room. He saw Zeus's wounded pride, Poseidon's anxious anger, Athena's piercing intellect, and Ares's simmering, humiliated rage. "Necessary," Zeus boomed, rising from his throne. The master bolt flying into his hand. "You have traveled the country leaving a trail of destruction." "A trail I was forced on," Percy countered, his voice rising slightly. "By a war you started over a misplaced toy. While you were accusing my father of treason, a real enemy was making a play for your throne." A murmur went through the assembled gods. This was not the groveling, terrified demigod they had expected. "What enemy?" Athena asked, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through the tension. "You speak of Hades." "Hades was a pawn, just like I was," Percy said. He turned his gaze on Ares. The real thief was standing on that beach in Santa Monica. He had the bolt and the helm of darkness. He admitted he'd been taking orders. Not from Hades. From a power that wants to see you all burn. Ares leapt to his feet. Lies. The boy is a traitor, a spy for my uncle. Sit down. Poseidon's voice was a low, dangerous wave, and Ares, surprisingly, obeyed, sinking back into his throne with a snarl. Poseidon looked at Percy, a flicker of pride in his deep-set eyes. Let him speak. Percy took a breath. He couldn't tell them everything. But he could give them a target. There's a faction, calling themselves the New Dawn. Their agents are demigods. They believe you're corrupt, decadent, and that your time is over. They orchestrated the theft to start this war, hoping you'd destroy each other. Just as he spoke, a new voice entered his mind. It was not a sound, but a thought, smooth and seductive as silk, yet sharp as glass. It was a woman's voice, full of charismatic fire and an intellect that rivaled Athena's. They use you, Percy Jackson, the voice whispered, a violation of his deepest consciousness. Look at them, squabbling children on golden chairs, drunk on their own power. They call you a hero when you serve them, and a traitor when you question them. Is that the justice you fight for? It was Eris. She was here, not in body, but in spirit, her divine were reaching across the veil to touch his mind. The force of her will was immense. An image flooded his vision. Olympus in ruins, its gleaming towers shattered, and from the rubble, a new pantheon rising, led by a goddess with laughing, chaotic eyes, a world forged by strength and merit, not by the accident of birth. The new dawn is not about destruction, her voice cooed in his head. It is about creation, a new world, free from the fates, rigid threads and the Olympians, stagnant tyranny. A boy with your vision, your power to see beyond the veil, you belong with us. Help me tear down this gilded cage. Her arguments were potent. They echoed his own frustrations, his own cold anger at the system. For a terrifying second, he felt the pull of her logic. The Olympians were flawed, proud, and dangerous. But then he saw another image in his mind, one of his own making. Annabeth, her face fierce with determination. Grover, his heart full of loyalty. His mother, her spirit trapped in the underworld because of these grand cosmic games. He had made a promise. He had chosen his side, with all its flaws. Get out of my head, he thought back, his will a blade of cold, hard focus, empowered by the clarity of his sharingan. The presence recoiled, not in pain, but in surprise, leaving behind a faint, lingering echo of amused laughter. He was back in the throne room, only a second having passed. The gods were staring at him, unaware of the silent battle that had just been waged for his soul. Who leads this new dawn? Zeus demanded. Percy's resolve hardened. He would not give them Eris's name. He would not give them another target for their paranoia. He would give them a traitor they could see. A betrayer they could understand. He needed to lance the boil, to expose the rot within their own ranks. The demigod who served Ares, Percy said, his voice ringing with authority. The one who stole the bolt and the helm in the first place, was a hero of Camp Half-Blood. He was one of your own. He looked at Zeus, at Athena, at all of them. He would not just tell them. He would show them. You want proof? He asked, his voice dropping. I will give you proof. He focused, pushing his sharingan's power outwards. Not to attack, but to project. He opened the floodgates of his perfect memory, and the air in the center of the throne room shimmered. A series of holographic images, memories seen through his own eyes, began to play out for the gods to witness. The first image was of Luke, on the day of the quest, handing Annabeth the winged shoes. A gift from my father, Luke's voice echoed. But Percy's vision focused on the subtle, almost invisible shimmer of dark magic clinging to the sandals, a curse designed to pull their wearer into Tartarus. The next image. Luke at the campfire. His expression grim as he spoke of quests and glory, but Percy's vision highlighted the flicker of bitter resentment in his eyes, the subtle sneer on his lips when he thought no one was looking. Then, the final, damning memory, a conversation Percy had overheard, a memory he had not even understood at the time. Luke, speaking to someone in the woods, his back turned. It is done. The half-blood is on his way. The bolt is with him. Ares will intercept him, as you commanded, my lady. The projection faded. The throne room was utterly silent. The gods stared at the empty space where the images had been. Their faces a mixture of shock, disbelief, and dawning fury. Percy had not just made an accusation. He had presented an undeniable, visual record of betrayal. Hermes, Luke's father, looked pale, his face a mask of grief and shame. Zeus sank back onto his throne, his face a thundercloud of thought. The evidence was irrefutable. His war with Poseidon had been a farce, a distraction engineered by one of their own children. My son. Poseidon's voice was a low rumble of pride. You have done the impossible. You have brought us the truth. Percy looked at his father, and for the first time, he felt a genuine connection, a bond of respect between two kings, one of the sea, one of his own, small, violent world. The hero's reward, Zeus declared, his voice heavy. Name your prize, Percy Jackson. Anything you desire. Percy's mind raced. Wealth, power, immortality. They were all meaningless. He knew what he wanted. What he needed. My mother, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Hades took her. I ask that you command him to release her soul. Zeus nodded, a flicker of something akin to respect in his eyes. A noble request. It shall be done. He waved a hand, and a clap of thunder sealed the oath. A wave of relief so profound it almost brought Percy to his knees washed over him. He was a hero. He had saved the world. He had saved his mother. But as he stood in the throne room of the gods, their gratitude washing over him, he felt no joy. He saw the cracks in their power, the fragility of their unity. And he knew that the traitor, Luke, was still out there, serving a new, intelligent, and utterly ruthless power. The return to Camp Half-Blood was triumphant. He, Annabeth, and Grover were hailed as heroes of the age. They were carried on the shoulders of their fellow campers to a massive bonfire, where they were awarded laurel wreaths. The camp celebrated their victory, a release of a week's worth of tension and fear. But for Percy, the celebration felt hollow. He saw the happy faces, but his sharingan saw the undercurrents of jealousy in the Ares cabin, the speculative curiosity in the eyes of the others. He was no longer one of them. He was an outsider, a powerhouse, a prince of the sea. He found Luke by the armory, polishing a new, wicked-looking sword. He was alone, the sounds of the party a distant echo. They're celebrating you, you know, Luke said without looking up, his voice casual. They're celebrating a lie, Percy replied, stopping a few feet away. The quest isn't over. Luke finally looked up, and his friendly, easygoing mask was gone. In its place was the cold, sneering face from Percy's prophecy. You're smarter than I gave you credit for, Percy. I thought for sure the winged shoes would do the trick. What happened to you, Luke? Percy asked, his hand hovering over Riptide. Why? Luke laughed, a bitter, angry sound. You saw them, Percy. Up on their golden thrones. Did they care about us? About their own children? We're just tools to them, pawns in their games. They're failures. It's time for a new age. An age of heroes. His words were an echo of Erissa's. The ideology of the new dawn. Spoken from the mouth of a boy he had once considered a friend. You're a tool for them too, Luke, Percy said softly. For Eris. For Kronos. He'd pieced it together. Eris provided the ideology, but the dark magic he'd felt. The whispers from Tartarus. That was something older. Something far worse. Luke's eyes widened at the name of the Titan Lord, then narrowed into slits of pure hatred. He will rise, and he will tear down this rotten age of the gods. And we, the demigods, will rule in their place. Join me, Percy. With your power, we could remake the world. He lunged. It wasn't a clumsy charge. It was the explosive, precise attack of the best swordsman in 100 years. His new blade, Backbiter, with its two-toned steel and celestial bronze, was a blur aimed at Percy's heart. But Percy was ready. His sharingan saw the attack coming. He drew Riptide, blocking the strike in a shower of sparks. Their blades locked, inches from Percy's face. It's a shame, Luke hissed, his face contorted with rage. You could have been a prince in the new world. He summoned a creature from the ground, a monstrous, armored scorpion that scuttled towards Percy, its stinger dripping with a poison that sizzled on the ground. Luke used the distraction to disengage, turning and sprinting towards the woods. This isn't over, Jackson. He yelled over his shoulder. There's a war coming. That will make you beg for the days of fighting your father's battles. Percy dispatched the scorpion with a single, precise thrust of his blade, but by the time he looked up, Luke was gone, having vanished into the shadows of the forest. The party was over. The quest was done. But the truth was now chillingly clear. He had not prevented a war. He had just fired the first shot in a much larger, much deadlier one. And the enemy was no longer a distant, angry god. He was one of them. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Crimson Price. The hero's welcome was a fleeting, fever-bright thing. For one night, Camp Half-Blood celebrated. They burned a shroud for Percy, a sea-green silk cloth embroidered with a blazing trident, a gesture of honor for a hero who had gone to the underworld and returned. Ey sang songs of his victory over the god of war. They toasted his name with cherry coke. Percy played the part, managing a tight, tired smile, but his sharingan saw the fractures in the celebration. He saw the awe in the younger camper's eyes, but also the raw, fearful respect that bordered on mistrust. He saw the envy simmering in the Ares cabin, a dark, bruised purple in their auras. He saw Annabeth watching him, her strategist's mind constantly working, trying to deconstruct him, to understand the impossible variable he represented. He was a hero, yes, but he was no longer just one of them. He was a prince of the sea, a monster slayer, and a wielder of a strange, unknowable power. He was an omen. The days that followed settled into a tense, watchful rhythm. The camp was on a war footing. Sentries were posted at the border. Patrols swept the woods, and the training schedule became relentless. The news of Luke's betrayal had poisoned the camp's idyllic atmosphere, replacing trust with suspicion. Every demigod now looked at their neighbor and wondered, could you be next? Percy's mother had returned home, a disorienting, miraculous gift from the gods that left him with a feeling of profound, aching relief. He spoke to her on an iris message, her voice trembling but alive, her face tear-streaked but real. The joy of that moment was a small, warm light in the growing darkness of his thoughts. He had fulfilled half a promise. The other half, the one he had made to himself in the underworld, to come back for her, had been rendered moot by the whims of a god. He was grateful, but the feeling of being a pawn, of his own choices being invalidated, lingered. His relationship with Annabeth changed. The rivalry was gone, replaced by a wary, intense partnership. They sparred daily, and their sessions became the talk of the camp. It wasn't a clash of equals. It was a battle between a master strategist and a force of nature. Annabeth would devise the most intricate, unpredictable attack patterns, using feints, terrain, and misdirection with the genius of her mother. And Percy would see through it all. It's infuriating, she said one afternoon, breathing heavily as she leaned on her sword. Percy's blade resting lightly against her guard. I plan 3 moves ahead. You counter the 4th. How? Percy's sharingan, a placid 3-tomo spin, watched the bead of sweat tracing a path down her temple. You think in lines and angles, Annabeth. I see the whole picture. All at once, he lunged, not with brute force, but with a fluid, unpredictable motion he'd copied from a swirling eddy in a stream. He disarmed her, Riptide's pommel gently tapping her wrist, her sword clattering on the packed earth of the arena. You're not just a son of Poseidon, are you? She asked, her gray eyes narrowed. Not with anger, but with a burning, desperate need to understand. This power of yours, it's not demigod magic. It's something else. He couldn't give her an answer. He just offered her a hand up. Their fingers brushed, a brief, electric touch that sent a strange warmth through his chest. It was a connection forged not in flirting or friendship, but in the shared crucible of battle and secrets. She was the only one who seemed to see past the hero, to the strange, dangerous power coiled beneath. The attack came on a hot, humid evening, a week after his return. The conch horn blew a frantic, discordant blast, the alarm for an invasion. Percy was on his feet before the first echo died, Riptide already in his hand, his sharingan blazing to life. He met Chiron on the steps of the big house. The old centaur's face grim, his bow already in hand. They're coming from the woods, Chiron said, his voice tight. All sides. It's a coordinated assault. Percy didn't need to be told. His eyes pierced the twilight gloom, seeing past the trees, past the camp's magical borders. He saw them, not a random assortment of monsters, but a disciplined force. Demigods, dozens of them, bearing the broken chain symbol of the new dawn, moved in tactical formations. They were supported by hellhounds, Laestrygonian giants, and other, fouler things that scuttled in the shadows. This wasn't a raid, it was an army, and leading them, standing on a ridge overlooking the valley, was a figure whose aura burned with a cold, disciplined fury. "Luke?" Annabeth asked, appearing beside him, her bronze knife gleaming. Percy shook his head. "No, someone else, someone new." The battle for Camp Half-Blood began. It was a nightmare of chaos and terror. The camp's defenses, designed to repel small incursions, buckled under the sheer weight and strategy of the assault. The New Dawn demigods were ruthless and efficient. They fought with a fanaticism Percy had only seen in Lysound's dying eyes. They weren't just trying to win, they were trying to annihilate. Percy became the heart of the storm. He was everywhere at once, a whirlwind of sea green and crimson. His sharingan gave him a battlefield omniscience that was terrifying to behold. "Clarice, left flank, hellhounds are breaking through," he yelled, his voice cutting through the din of battle. He parried a blow from a giant without looking, his eyes fixed on a different skirmish 100 yards away. "Stoll brothers, fire arrows on the ridge. Suppress their archers." He ducked under a swinging club, riptide flashing, hamstringing the Laestrygonian before spinning to engage 2 enemy demigods. He was a perfect general and a perfect soldier, all in one. He saw every enemy strategy, every feint, every flanking maneuver before it happened. He coordinated the camp's chaotic, desperate defense into a cohesive, fighting force. He moved through the battle like a ghost, his blade a blur, his crimson eyes predicting every blow. He was turning the tide. He was winning, and the enemy commander, the figure on the ridge, saw it too. His name was Astarion, a son of Enyo, the goddess of destruction. He was a master of war, a brutal tactician who had been handpicked by Eris to lead this assault. He watched Percy through a celestial bronze spyglass, his face a mask of cold fury. Jackson was not a demigod, he was a natural disaster, a single, unstoppable variable that was dismantling his entire, perfectly planned invasion. Astarion lowered his spyglass. He could not defeat Percy in a direct confrontation, but he could break him. He raised a hand and gave a sharp, curt signal to a smaller, secondary force hidden in the woods near the camp's armory. The target was not the big house, or the cabins. The target. She was the girl who fought at Percy's side like his own shadow. A diversionary charge of hellhounds on the west flank drew Percy's attention. He saw the younger campers, the Hermes and Apollo kids, being overwhelmed. His protective instincts flared. "Annabeth," he yelled, locking blades with an enemy swordsman. "Hold the line at the big house. I have to reinforce the west." "Go," she shouted back, her knife flashing as she took down a Dracena. "We've got this." He trusted her. He turned and sprinted towards the sounds of the most desperate fighting, a sea-green blur of motion. It was a classic feint, a strategic misdirection, and he had fallen for it completely. As he reached the western flank, a piercing whistle cut through the air. The secondary force, Astarion's assassins, burst from the woods, ignoring the main battle lines and making a beeline for the armory, where Annabeth was trying to rally a group of Athena campers for a counterattack. Percy's head snapped around, his Sharingan instantly perceiving the new threat. He saw their trajectory. He saw their target. Annabeth. "No," he breathed. He started running, his heart pounding with a cold, sudden dread. He was too far. The distance was too great. He watched in slow-motion horror as Annabeth, seeing the new threat, pushed her half-siblings back, her knife held ready. She was brave. She was a fighter. But she was outnumbered 10-1. He saw the lead assassin, a grim-faced daughter of Nemesis, pull a small, dark sphere from her belt and hurl it not at Annabeth, but at the armory wall behind her. A Greek fire bomb. "Annabeth, move," he screamed, his voice raw. The world seemed to lose its sound. He saw Annabeth's eyes widen as she saw the bomb. He saw her try to dive away. He saw the brilliant, silent, green flash of the explosion. The force of the blast threw him from his feet. The armory, a stone building that had stood for decades, erupted in a cloud of splintered rock and green flame. And Annabeth was gone. Buried. Percy lay on the ground, the roar of the battle a distant, meaningless hum. All he could see was the smoking crater where the armory had been. Where she had been. He reached out with his senses. His power, trying to feel her, to find any sign of life. Nothing. Just a void. A sudden, absolute, crushing emptiness where her bright, fierce, silver aura had been. The prophecy. You shall fail to save what matters most, in the end. He had thought it meant his mother. He had been wrong. So wrong. He had saved his mother, only to lose this. He had failed. He had let her die. Something inside him broke. It was not a loud, dramatic snap. It was a deep, silent, seismic fracture of the soul. The grief, the rage, the absolute, soul-crushing loss hit him with the force of a physical blow. The world around him seemed to lose all color, all meaning, all light. There was only the gaping, black hole of her absence. A pain, sharp and blinding, erupted behind his eyes. It felt as if his very consciousness was being torn in two. He screamed, a raw, inhuman sound of pure agony that cut through the noise of the battle, making both friend and foe freeze in their tracks. He clawed at his face, a thick, hot wetness running through his fingers. Blood. His eyes were bleeding. He staggered to his feet, his head tilted towards the sky. The three black tomo in his eyes, the symbols of his sight and power, began to spin, faster and faster, blurring into a single, crimson circle. Then, they began to change. They twisted, warped, the simple commas elongating and merging into a new, complex, horrifyingly beautiful geometric pattern, a three-pronged, pinwheel-like shape. The Mangekyo Sharingan had awakened, and with it, came a power born of his deepest despair. He looked across the battlefield, his gaze settling on the new dawn forces that had just killed her. The world he saw through his new eyes was different. It was stark, clear, and utterly devoid of mercy. He saw the threads of life that connected every living thing, and he saw how to burn them. He focused on the daughter of Nemesis, who was looking back at him, a triumphant sneer on her face. Amaterasu, he whispered, a word he had only ever read, a name for a power he should not have possessed. The world held its breath. Where he looked, reality itself seemed to tear. A pinpoint of absolute blackness appeared on the assassin's chest. It was not a flame in the normal sense. It did not radiate heat or light. It was a corruption, a piece of the abyss given form. The black fire erupted, silent and inexorable. The demigod didn't even have time to scream. The black flames consumed her, her celestial bronze armor melting like wax, her body turning to ash in an instant. But the flames did not stop. They leapt to the demigod next to her, and the one next to him, spreading with an unholy, unstoppable hunger. They did not burn like normal fire. They annihilated, erasing whatever they touched from existence. A wave of terror, colder and more profound than the fear of any monster, washed over the battlefield. The new dawn forces stared, their fanaticism dissolving into primal horror. This was not the power of a demigod. This was the power of a vengeful, primordial god. Percy felt no triumph. He felt nothing but the burning agony in his eyes and the gaping wound in his soul. He turned his gaze upon the rest of the invading army. Black flames erupted in their ranks, silent, unstoppable, and absolute. Hellhounds, giants, demigods, it didn't matter. All were erased by the inextinguishable fire of his grief. His own side, the campers of half-blood, scrambled back in terror, their faces pale with shock. They weren't looking at their hero anymore. They were looking at a monster. Asterion, on the ridge, watched his army being immolated, his strategic mind completely shattered by the sheer, cosmic horror of what he was witnessing. He dropped his spyglass and ran. The battle was over. The enemy was routed, incinerated, gone. Percy had won. He had saved the camp. Single-handedly. The strength, the rage, the divine power, all fled him at once, leaving behind an agony so profound it buckled his knees. His vision was blurring, the edges darkening, the world dissolving into a tunnel of pain. The strain of the Mangekyo was destroying his eyes, burning out his light. He stumbled towards the rubble of the armory, his legs barely able to hold him. He fell to his knees, his hands clawing at the broken stones, heedless of the sharp edges that tore at his fingers. Annabeth, he choked out, his voice a broken whisper. He felt something, a faint flicker, a single, fragile, silver thread, buried deep beneath the wreckage, so faint he had almost missed it. She was alive. With a final, desperate surge of will, he reached out, not with his hands, but with his father's power. The rubble, the tons of stone and splintered wood, began to shift and tremble. The massive blocks lifted into the air, held aloft by his will, revealing a small pocket in the foundation. And there she was, lying in a crumpled heap, pale and unmoving, covered in dust, a nasty gash on her forehead. Her leg bent at an unnatural angle. But she was breathing, shallowly, faintly. But she was alive. The world went dark. The last thing he saw before consciousness failed him was her still, pale face. The stones he was holding aloft crashed back to the ground around her still form. He collapsed, his body finally succumbing to the terrible, crimson price of his power, his hand outstretched towards the girl he had almost lost. As the camp he had just saved burned around him. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Labyrinth of Lies. Waking was a slow, agonizing crawl out of a deep, black pit. Percy's first sensation was pain. A dull, throbbing ache that seemed to emanate from the core of his being. His head, his muscles, his very bones felt bruised and strained. But the sharpest pain, a piercing, grinding agony like hot sand behind his eyelids, came from his eyes. He tried to open them, but they were sealed shut, crusted over with dried blood and tears. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. He heard voices, hushed and anxious. Will Solace, the head healer from the Apollo cabin, was one. I don't understand it. There's no physical damage to the optic nerve, but his sight, it's like it's been burned out from the inside. The light sensitivity is off the charts. Chiron's voice was a low, troubled rumble. It was the power he used. I've never seen anything like it. It was not of his father. It felt older, more primordial, a power born from sacrifice. Percy forced his eyes open. The world was a blinding, overexposed glare of white light, every shape blurred and haloed, every color muted. He squeezed them shut again, a groan escaping his lips. He could see, but it was like looking at the world through a fractured, sun-bleached lens. The hyper-clarity of the sharingan was gone, replaced by a painful, degraded mockery of sight. He's awake, Will said, his voice closer now. A cool, gentle hand rested on Percy's forehead, and a soft, golden light seeped into him, soothing some of the aches but doing nothing for the fire in his eyes. Annabeth. Percy's voice was a dry, broken rasp. It was the only name, the only thought, that mattered. She's alive, Chiron said. And Percy felt a wave of relief so profound it almost sent him back into unconsciousness. Her leg was badly broken, and she has a severe concussion, but she's strong. She's resting in the next bed. Percy pushed himself up, ignoring the protests from Will and the dizzying vertigo that swept over him. He swung his legs over the side of the cot. He had to see her. He blinked, forcing his damaged eyes to focus. The infirmary was a blur, but he could make out her form in the bed next to his, her blonde hair stark against the white pillow, her leg encased in a bulky celestial bronze cast. She was pale, but she was breathing. The silver thread of her life, though frayed, was still intact. He could see it, a faint, shimmering line in the chaotic blur of the world. He had saved her, but he memory of that moment of absolute loss, the belief that she was gone, was a fresh, raw wound. It was that grief, that despair, that had unlocked the terrible power of the Mangekyo. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that his new eyes were not a gift, but a brand, a permanent scar left by his failure. The days that followed were a new kind of torment. Camp Half-Blood was a place of ghosts and whispers. He was the hero who had single-handedly repelled an army, the savior who had unleashed a divine fire to protect them. But he was also the monster. The one with the bleeding eyes and the terrifying, uncontrollable power. Campers would fall silent when he approached, their auras a mixture of awe and raw, primal fear. They would look at him, then at the great, black scorch marks that now scarred the hills around the camp, patches of earth where nothing would grow, where the very soil had been annihilated by Amaterasu. He was their protector, and they were terrified of him. His vision did not improve. Every time he used his sharingan, even the basic 3-tomo form, the pain was immediate and sharp, and his sight would degrade a little further. The Mangekyo was a forbidden door, and he knew that if he used it again, the cost might be his sight itself. He was a swordsman, a fighter who relied on his eyes, and he was going blind. The irony was a bitter pill. He spent most of his time by Annabeth's bedside. She was in and out of consciousness for the first few days, and in her waking moments, she was disoriented and in pain. He would sit with her, not speaking, just being a silent, watchful presence. He would help the Apollo campers change her bandages, feed her nectar and ambrosia, and listen to her mutter deliriously about architectural designs and battle strategies. It was during one of these quiet vigils that they began to unravel the enemy's true plan. Annabeth, in a moment of lucidity, her gray eyes sharp despite the pain, whispered, "The armory, Percy, they weren't trying to destroy it. They were trying to get in." Percy's blood ran cold. He had been so focused on the attack on Annabeth, he hadn't considered the target's strategic value. "What's in the armory?" he asked. "Old things," she murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Trophies from old quests, banners, and maps. The oldest maps of the camp. Maps that show the weak points. The ancient entrances." The pieces clicked into place. The full frontal assault had been a distraction. The targeted strike on the armory, the one that had almost killed Annabeth, had a dual purpose: to take her off the board, and to secure a way into the camp that bypassed the magical borders. Working with a recovering Annabeth and a deeply shaken Grover, Percy began an investigation. His damaged eyesight made it difficult. But his sharingan, though painful to use, could still perceive things others couldn't. He could see the faint, lingering traces of unfamiliar auras, the subtle disturbances in the camp's magical field. Their search led them to an unassuming rock formation in the woods, a place known to the campers as Zeus's Fist. To the naked eye, it was just a pile of rocks. But Percy, his eyes burning with the effort, saw the illusion. He saw the faint seam of a hidden entrance, disguised by a glamour so old and powerful it had been forgotten by everyone except the children of Athena. "This is it," Annabeth said, leaning heavily on a crutch, her face grim. "It's an entrance to the labyrinth." Grover bleated nervously. "The labyrinth, as in Daedalus's labyrinth. I thought that was just a myth. Under the palace in Crete. The labyrinth is a living thing, Grover," Annabeth explained, her voice filled with a mixture of academic fascination and dread. "It grows. It moves. It connects any point to any other point. As long as there's an entrance. And Eris, she's been using it. Like a secret highway, right under our feet." The New Dawn's strategy was suddenly terrifyingly clear. They hadn't needed to break the camp's borders. They had just walked in through the basement. The decision was made. They had to go in. They had to find out where the New Dawn's base of operations was, what their next move was. Chiron was against it, deeming it too dangerous, but Percy was resolute. "They almost killed Annabeth to get in here," he said, his voice a low growl that silenced all argument. "They're planning something big. We're not going to wait for them to bring it to our door." He, Annabeth, and Grover prepared to enter the maze. They were joined, unexpectedly, by Tyson, Percy's Cyclops half-brother, who had arrived at camp a few days earlier. The other campers had treated him with fear and suspicion, but Percy had seen only the gentle, loyal soul beneath the monstrous exterior. Tyson's strength and his natural immunity to fire would be invaluable assets. Descending into the labyrinth was like stepping into a madman's dream. The corridors were a constantly shifting maze of stone and earth, lit by flickering bronze torches that cast long, dancing shadows. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and something else, something ancient and metallic. Annabeth, with her architect's mind, was their guide, but even she was struggling. The labyrinth was more than a physical space, it was a psychic one, preying on their fears, twisting their sense of direction. They faced sphinxes with riddles that attacked their deepest insecurities, and navigated corridors that seemed to loop back on themselves in impossible ways. Percy's role was different. His damag, Ed vision made navigating by sight difficult, but his sharingan could perceive the labyrinth on another level. He saw the threads of magic that powered the maze, the intentions of its creator woven into the very stones. And he saw the path their enemies had taken, a faint, lingering trail of their broken chain auras, a scar left on the magical fabric of the maze. "This way," he would say, pointing down a dark, uninviting tunnel. They went this way. Deeper in, they found the Forge of Hephaestus, an infernal cavern of lava and machinery where the blacksmith god worked, his face grim. He was aware of the intruders in his domain and was not pleased. He forced them into a task, to find who was using his forges in the mortal world, in a place he called the Mountain of Despair. The labyrinth spat them out under a mountain. Percy tasted the air, the scent of sulfur and pine. Mount St. Helens. Here, in a vast, hollowed-out cavern deep within the volcano, they found it, the heart of the New Dawn's western operation. It was a massive forge, just as Hephaestus had said, but it was manned not by Cyclops, but by Telkynes, ancient sea demons with dog-like faces and flippered feet. And at the center of the cavern, they were forging a new weapon. A massive, black iron sarcophagus, etched with runes that pulsed with a dark, terrifying power. Luke was there. He stood directing the Telkynes. His face no longer that of a bitter teenager, but of a true believer, a general in a holy war. He was overseeing the final preparations for the sarcophagus. Percy, Annabeth, Grover, and Tyson watched from a high ledge. Hidden in the shadows. "What is that thing?" Grover whispered, his voice trembling. "It's a coffin," Annabeth breathed, her eyes wide with horror. "But it's also a vessel. An anchor. They're preparing it for a powerful spirit." "Kronos," Percy said, the name a cold weight in his gut. "They're making a new body for him." Luke's plan was far worse than they had imagined. He wasn't just trying to win a war. He was trying to bring back the Titan Lord of Time himself, to unleash a force that could unravel creation. Their discovery did not go unnoticed. A Telkyne guard spotted them, its howl echoing through the cavern. They were surrounded in an instant. The fight was a desperate, chaotic brawl. Tyson was a force of nature, smashing through the sea demons with a massive club. Grover used his reed pipes, the panic-inducing melody sending some of the lesser monsters fleeing in terror. Annabeth, despite her injured leg, fought with a fierce, deadly grace, her knife a blur. Percy went straight for Luke. Their duel was a clash of titans, a storm of celestial bronze and two-toned steel amidst the volcanic forge. They were no longer camper versus camper. Why were avatars of two opposing ideologies. "You're too late, Percy," Luke yelled, his blade locking with Percy's. "The pieces are already in motion. When Lord Kronos rises, the age of the gods will be washed away in a tide of blood." Percy gritted his teeth, the strain of the fight aggravating the pain in his eyes. His vision was blurring, dark spots dancing at the edges. Luke was better than before, faster. His movements augmented by the Titan's growing power. Percy was fighting on instinct, his sharingan barely able to keep up. He saw an opening, a desperate gamble. He had to end this. He had to stop the ritual. He pushed Luke back, creating a sliver of space. He closed his eyes, drawing on the dregs of his power, and activated the Mangekyo. The pain was blinding, a white-hot agony that threatened to shatter his mind. He refused to use Amaterasu. He couldn't risk his friends. He focused instead on another power, one born of the same darkness. A genjutsu, an illusion. He locked his crimson, pinwheel gaze onto Luke. Tsukuyomi. Luke's world vanished. He was no longer in the forge. He was on Mount Olympus, but it was a twisted, nightmarish version. The thrones were empty, covered in dust and cobwebs. The sky was a perpetual, blood-red twilight. And in the center of the throne room, a colossal, shadowy figure was slowly, inexorably devouring the world, consuming gods, mortals, and demigods alike. A vision of Kronos' ultimate victory, not a glorious new age for heroes, but a nihilistic void where everything ceased to exist. He was forced to experience this hopeless, empty eternity in what was, in reality, only a single second. In the real world, Luke screamed, a thin, terrified wail, and collapsed, his eyes wide with a horror no mortal mind was meant to witness. He was not dead, but his spirit was broken. His fanaticism shattered by the absolute truth of his master's endgame. The genjutsu, however, had taken its toll. Percy fell to one knee, his vision almost completely gone. The world a swirling mess of black and gray. The pain in his eyes was a supernova. He was perilously close to eternal blindness. The Telkynes, seeing their leader fall, let out a collective howl of rage and surged forward. Tyson roared, placing himself in front of the kneeling Percy, a living shield. But there were too many of them. It was then that a new sound echoed in the cavern. A metallic clanking, a rhythmic, powerful footstep. A 10-foot-tall figure made of bronze and steel strode into the forge, its eyes glowing with a dull red light. It was a Talos, an ancient automaton. And sitting on its shoulder, his face a mask of grim satisfaction, was a man with a wild, dark beard and a crippled leg. Daedalus, the creator of the labyrinth. With him was Briars, the hundred-handed one, freed from his prison. The tide of the battle turned instantly. Daedalus and his automaton, along with the might of the hundred-handed one, carved a path through the Telkines, giving Percy and his friends the opening they needed. Go, Daedalus roared, I will seal this place. The labyrinth must not fall into his hands. They fled, carrying the catatonic Luke with them, as the Eater of the labyrinth prepared to make his final stand, to bury his greatest creation, and the Titan's forge, under 1,000,000 tons of volcanic rock. They stumbled out of the labyrinth back into the relative safety of Camp Half-Blood. Just as a massive tremor shook the entire country. Mount St. Helens had erupted. They had escaped. They had captured Luke. They had stopped the immediate threat. But Percy knew, as he collapsed into the arms of his friends, his world fading into a near-total darkness, that they had only delayed the inevitable. Kronos was still stirring, and he, the hero who had saved them all, had sacrificed his own light to stare into the abyss. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Eye of Heaven and Hell. Darkness. For 3 days, that was Percy's entire world. A suffocating, featureless black, punctuated only by the distant sounds of the camp and the sharp, phantom pains that still echoed behind his useless eyes. Will Solace and the Apollo cabin had done everything they could. They had used healing songs, applied nectar and ambrosia poultices, and even prayed to their father for a miracle. But divine medicine could not heal a wound that was not entirely physical. The Mangekyo Sharingan had consumed his light, burning out his connection to the world as payment for its terrible power. He was blind. He spent those 3 days in the infirmary, a silent, brooding presence in the bed next to Annabeth. Her leg was healing, her concussion fading, but a new, deeper wound had been opened in her. She had seen the labyrinth, seen the true scale of their enemies' preparations, and it had shaken her to the core. She sat with him for hours, reading aloud from her architecture books, her voice a steady, comforting anchor in his sea of blackness. She didn't treat him with pity. She treated him like a wounded strategist, a fellow warrior temporarily sidelined. She described the camp's new defenses, the morale of the campers, the grim, silent state of the catatonic Luke, who was being held in the big house's magically reinforced basement. He just stares, she told him, her voice low. He doesn't eat, he doesn't sleep. Whatever you showed him in that mountain, Percy, it broke him completely. Percy said nothing. The memory of the Tsukuyomi, of the absolute, soul-crushing despair he had poured into Luke's mind, was a cold, heavy stone in his gut. He had wielded a power meant to shatter minds, and the cost had been his own sight. It felt like a grim, cosmic justice. On the 4th day, as Annabeth was describing the intricate joinery of the Parthenon, Tyson lumbered into the infirmary. Brother, he said, his single, large eye filled with a sorrow so profound it was heartbreaking. The sea calls for you. Chiron says it is time. With Annabeth on one side and Tyson on the other, Percy walked from the infirmary. The journey to the beach was a strange, disorienting experience. He could feel the warmth of the sun on his skin, hear the distant clang of swords in the arena. But the world he had once perceived with impossible clarity was gone. He was an exile in his own head. They helped him into the surf. The cool Atlantic water swirled around his ankles, then his knees. A familiar energy, the raw, ancient power of his father's domain, rose to meet him. It was a comforting, paternal embrace. He took a deep breath, the salt stinging his nostrils, and submerged himself, letting the ocean take him. Down, down he sank, into the green, silent depths. The pressure should have crushed him, the cold should have stolen the breath from his lungs. Instead, he felt whole. The water washed away the pain, the exhaustion. And in the crushing, silent darkness of the deep, a new kind of sight began to awaken. It was not sight as he knew it. He did not see with his eyes. He perceived. He felt the currents, the subtle shifts in pressure, the life signs of the creatures that swam in the abyss around him. He felt the very pulse of the ocean itself. And through that connection, he felt his father. Poseidon's presence was not a voice or a vision. It was a feeling of immense, ancient power and a deep, sorrowful pride. He showed Percy images, not through light, but through a direct transfer of thought and emotion. He showed him Typhon, the storm giant, stirring in his prison beneath Mount St. Helens, the volcano's eruption a direct result of the battle in the forge. The beast was waking, his ancient hatred for the gods rekindled by the Titan's growing power. And he showed Percy Kronos. He showed him the scattered essence of the Titan Lord, slowly, inexorably pulling itself together, drawn to the vessel his followers had forged. The final battle was coming. Not in weeks or months. Days. Then, his father offered him a choice. A way out. He could stay in the sea. In his father's realm. He could abandon the surface world, the prophecies, the wars, the pain. Here, in the heart of the ocean, he would be a prince, safe and powerful. He would be healed. It was the same temptation Lethus had offered in the Lotus Casino. An escape, an end to his burdens. Percy thought of Annabeth, her fierce, loyal face. He thought of Grover's unwavering friendship. He thought of Tyson's simple, powerful love. He thought of the campers, who feared him but also followed him. His world was one of pain, yes. But it was also a world of connection. A world worth fighting for. No, he sent the thought back to his father. My place is with them. My fight is up there. There was a final surge of paternal love and regret, and then the presence receded. Percy was alone again, in the silent dark, but something had changed. A measure of his father's own power, a parting gift, flowed into him. It settled in his eyes, not healing the physical damage, but awakening a new, different kind of perception. He opened his eyes in the water. The world was still dark, but it was not empty. He could see the currents of the ocean, glowing with a soft, internal, sea-green light. He could see the life force of the fish around him, shimmering auras of silver and blue. It was a form of sage vision, a power born of his connection to the natural world of the sea. It was not the sharingan. It was something new, something his. When he emerged from the waves, Annabeth was waiting, her face etched with anxiety. He looked at her, and for the first time in days, he truly saw her. Not as a blur of light and color, but as a being of pure, vibrant energy. He saw the silver flame of her intellect, the steady, warm glow of her loyalty, the fierce, protective core of her spirit. She was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. I can see, he said, his voice filled with a quiet awe. It was not a lie. And it was not the whole truth. His eyes, to her, were still the same sea green they had always been. The crimson was gone. But behind them, a new power was stirring. The final battle began not with a bang, but with a betrayal. A massive bronze bull, a Colchis bull, thundered over the hill. The magical border of the camp shimmering and collapsing in its wake. Someone from inside had poisoned Talia's pine tree, the source of the camp's strength. The invasion had begun. The battle that followed was the camp's darkest hour. The forces of the new dawn, now openly allied with Kronos' monstrous legions, poured into the valley. This time, they were not led by a mere demigod commander. They were led by Luke, his body now whole, his eyes glowing with a malevolent golden light. He was no longer just Luke. He was a vessel, the host for the scattered consciousness of the Titan Lord. He wielded Backbiter, and at his side was the black iron sarcophagus, now pulsing with a terrifying power. The campers fought with the desperate courage of the doomed. Clarice led the Ares cabin in a glorious, suicidal charge. Annabeth, her leg still in a cast, directed the defenses from the porch of the big house, her voice a clarion call of strategy and hope. Percy stood at the head of the defense, a calm, immovable rock in the face of the crashing tide of monsters. His blindness had become a strange kind of strength. He was no longer distracted by the chaos of battle. He perceived the fight on a deeper, more fundamental level. He felt the ebb and flow of the armies, the surges of power, the points of weakness. He moved with a fluid, intuitive grace, riptide an extension of his will. His new sight guiding him through the enemy ranks like a phantom. He fought his way to the center of the battle, to the black sarcophagus. He knew, with an absolute certainty, that this was the linchpin. If Kronos could anchor his spirit in that vessel, the war would be lost. He faced Luke. Look at you, Jackson. The voice that came from Luke's mouth was ancient, layered, and full of a cold, cosmic amusement. It was Kronos, the blind seer, the broken hero. Your precious gods have abandoned you. Olympus is in chaos, trying to contain the storm giant your little battle awakened. No one is coming to save you. We don't need them, Percy said, his voice calm. He raised Riptide. We have ourselves. Their duel was not a clash of swords. It was a battle for the soul of the world. Kronos was impossibly fast, his movements powered by his control over time itself. He would slow Percy's perception, speed up his own attacks, creating openings that were impossible to counter. But Percy's new sight was not bound by the normal flow of time. He did not see movements, he saw intent. He felt the Titan's will, the surge of power that preceded each attack. He moved not in reaction, but in anticipation. His body a perfect, fluid counter to the Titan's temporal manipulations. He was holding his own. But he couldn't win. Kronos was too powerful. The campers were being pushed back. Their lines breaking. The camp was falling. It was then that Annabeth did something Percy had never anticipated. She hobbled from the porch of the big house, her knife in hand. A.N.D. placed herself between Percy and Luke. Stop, she said, her voice shaking but firm, not looking at Kronos, but at the boy inside. Luke, remember your promise. You said we would be a family. You said you would protect me. Kronos laughed, a sound like grinding glaciers. The boy is gone. There is only me. He raised his sword to strike her down. And in that moment, something happened in Percy's sight. He saw the golden, malevolent aura of Kronos. But deep within it, buried and almost extinguished, he saw a tiny, flickering spark of blue. Luke. He was still in there. Annabeth's words, her presence, had reached him. Percy knew what he had to do. He had one last, terrible card to play. A power he had sworn never to use again. The price would be everything. But it was the only way. He poured all of his remaining energy, his will, his very life force, into his eyes. He felt the familiar, agonizing sensation of his power shifting, the sea-green sage vision being consumed by a greater, darker fire. The Mangekyo Sharingan blazed to life in his blind eyes, a final, defiant crimson glare. He did not look at Kronos. He looked at Annabeth. He didn't use the black flames of Amaterasu, or the mind-shattering torment of Tsukuyomi. He used the Mangekyo's third, hidden power. The power over life and death itself. He poured his own life force, his own soul, into her, a wave of pure, unmaking and remaking energy. Annabeth collapsed, not dead, but changed. Kronos faltered, his killing blow stopping mid-swing, his golden eyes wide with confusion. He had felt the surge of power, a power that rivaled his own. When Annabeth rose to her feet, her leg was healed. Her concussion was gone, she was whole, but her eyes, her stormy gray eyes now held a new, terrifying light. In each iris, a single, black tomo spun in a field of gray. Percy had not just healed her. He had given her a part of himself. He had awakened the Sharingan in her. The feedback from the incredible transfer of power was too much. Percy cried out, a raw, final scream of agony, and collapsed, his body finally broken. The crimson light in his eyes faded, leaving behind only the darkness. He had given everything, but it was enough. Kronos, distracted by the impossible sight of a daughter of Athena with the eyes of a demon, had left himself open for a fraction of a second. And the spark of blue within him, Luke, fought his way to the surface. With a final, agonized roar, Luke took control of his own hand. He looked at Annabeth, his eyes clearing for a moment, filled with a terrible, tragic understanding. He will not be controlled. He gasped. My blade, it's the only way. He reversed his grip on Backbiter and plunged the cursed blade into his own side, the one mortal point on his body, the place where he had once been vulnerable. A wave of golden energy erupted from the wound, a supernova of divine power. The essence of the Titan Lord, its anchor destroyed, howled in fury and frustra. Cheon as it was blasted back into the abyss from whence it came. Luke collapsed, the golden light fading from his eyes, leaving only the familiar, tired blue. He lay dying in the dirt, Annabeth cradling his head. The army of monsters, their master banished, faltered, then broke, fleeing in a chaotic rout. The battle was over. Percy lay on the ground, the darkness absolute and final. He could hear the sounds of the camp, the cries of victory and sorrow. He could feel the warmth of the sun on his skin. He had saved them. He had won. He felt a hand take his. It was Annabeth's. He could feel the faint, strange hum of her new power. A power he had given her. She was his eyes now. His legacy. Percy, she whispered, her voice thick with tears. You idiot. You magnificent, blind idiot. He smiled, a faint, tired curve of his lips. He had walked a path of prophecy and betrayal, of gods and monsters. He had been gifted a power that had shown him the terrible, beautiful, intricate truth of the world. And in the end, he had given it all away to save what mattered most. Not a quest, not a god, not a victory, but a friend. In the darkness of his own making, he finally felt a sense of peace. The threads of fate, which he could no longer see, no longer mattered. He was free. He had written his own ending. And for the first time, he was ready to see what came next. Chapter 10 End.